Hey, Jessica.
Hi. Are we the first ones on here? The only ones on here?
I think we're the first ones, looks like. I'm just here for the work session today. I have to miss the main meeting for this other thing.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Hey guys, good to see you.
Treg, we can barely hear you.
Hello. Good to see you.
Can you talk like that the whole meeting?
Have anybody in the waiting room? All right. And with that, council, we will call this meeting to order. For the record, it is Tuesday, April 6, 2021 at 4:30 p.m. We will begin this afternoon's work session with roll call agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Borton,
Here.
Councilwoman Perot,
Here.
Councilwoman Strader,
Here?
Councilman Burnt,
Here.
Mayor Simison.
Here, that was the roll call attendance. We will now move on to the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
there is a change to the agenda. We are going to take off item 11, which is a final plat for Teakwood subdivision. It's going to be moved to a future work session. So with that, I move that we adopt the agenda as amended.
Mr. Neri, do we amend that once we get to consent or now?
You can do it now.
Okay, perfect. Do I have a second? Second. Have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Motion is agreed to and the agenda is adopted. Next item up is our consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move that we approve the consent agenda. I guess, would that be as amended or as amended? Okay, thank you.
I have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The motion is agreed to and the consent agenda is adopted as amended. Next item on the agenda is, there were no items moved from the consent agenda, so we move on to department commission reports. First up is the Park and Recreations Department. And I will turn this over to Audrey for the budget amendment. Hi, Audrey. You're muted.
Hello. Okay, good. It's working now. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and City Council. This budget amendment is for the funds received through a grant given to us by the Idaho Commission on the Arts. It's $1,080. We plan to use this grant for payments to the artists for the Traffic Box series this summer.
Thank you, Audrey. Council, do you have any questions?
No question.
If not, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Borton.
move that we approve the net zero budget amendment in the amount of $1,080 for the Idaho Commission of the Arts Grant Award.
Mr. Mayor, I second that.
I have a motion and a second to approve item 24. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, clerk call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Borton,
Aye.
Perot,
Hi.
Strader,
Aye.
Burnt,
All ayes, motion carries, and the amendment is adopted. Thank you, Audrey.
Thank
Have a
you.
good evening.
You too. Thank you.
Next item up is our Park and Recreation Department regarding spending authority for Lakeview Golf Course. We'll turn this over to Mr. Barton.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm here to request spending authority in the amount of $366,158 to purchase a new fleet of golf carts and some maintenance equipment for Lakeview Golf Course. As you're aware, last last October, a budget amendment of 700,000 was approved by council to fund the operating and payroll accounts of the golf course. The 700,000 was deducted from the 2.8 million that's been in the CIP, the CFP for capital improvements for the course. This amount was decided for the budget amendment, not because we thought that we would run that much of a deficit on the golf course, but primarily because we didn't know what we were going to get into, and we didn't know the condition of some of the operating capital, what some of the startup costs might be. So now that we've been out there for about 5 months, one of the things that has risen to the top is the fleet of existing golf carts. Half of them are from 1994, the other half are from 2012. There's many problems. We've been tracking some of the lost revenue through just lost rounds, turning golfers away when they come up to play a round. There's lost revenue in rounds and also lost revenue in cart fee rentals. And now that the weather is getting nicer, we've been renting some carts on the weekends for $350 a day for those carts. So we would like to request that spending authority, and I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mike. And council, the other thing I'd like to also point out is, Mike, if you want to touch on the consultant in terms of where this stood at the top of the needs assessment out there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. So yeah, we did, the National Golf Foundation did an initial survey when we first took over, and they gauged everything operational. The number one deficit from that survey was the condition of the fleet of golf carts. In fact, the Ed Getherall with the National Golf Foundation said he's never seen a number that low. And just for some additional context, in the month of March, we started tracking rounds lost and some of the revenue. In the month of March, we lost 68 rounds where customers came up and we just didn't have carts for them. You know, that equates to about $5,500 in green fee revenue and another $1,300 in cart revenue. The other thing we had is we had 5 that had to be rescued from the course. They would get halfway around and die or break down, or the wheel fell off. There's a variety of different problems. So yeah, they're old and in bad shape.
Thank you, Mike. So we at least have identified this. We knew it was a need, but we wanted to put it in context with the other needs, as well as some of the money that's put aside in the CFP for consideration as we move forward. So with that, council, do you have any questions for Mr. Barton?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Burnt.
As a golfer, not a good golfer, by the way, but as a golfer, there are 2 things that I believe that are pretty important when you're talking about golf courses. Number one are the carts. There's nothing worse than getting stranded or having a crappy cart that doesn't get you around the golf course. And there's too many other golf courses available that do a good job that make it so that people go other places. And so I think that it's a wise investment. But number 2 are greens. You know, you don't like to putt on greens that make it difficult. And some of the equipment I see that you've also purchased or will be purchasing will address that need as well. So I think these items are well needed. So I appreciate you. I appreciate the amount of time that was taken to really study this. You know, through the Golf Association as well. It really brought to light a bunch of things that we're missing and what we need going forward. So thanks, Mike.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Borden.
Mike, along those lines, Councilman Burnt hit the nail on the head with the value of this assessment. If you could put a pin in the idea of when it comes time to reestablish or review what the trail fee is, that perhaps some portion of the trail fee is segregated and utilized for cart paths and recapturing some of the depreciation and capital expenditures of these carts, trying to connect those two, and might be part of the long-term plan. So those folks that rent the carts their investment goes back into the trails that they utilize.
Thank you. We'll, like you said, we'll put a pin in it.
You got a lot going on.
That-
So, good job.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
as most of you know, I'm the liaison to the Parks and Recreation Department. Had an opportunity to take a tour with Mr. Barton and our director, Mr. Sitaway, and the general manager of Lakeview. And seeing it in person puts a whole new light on the reports. I had an opportunity to review the entire report from our consultant for the capital expenditure recommendations, and wholeheartedly agree with my fellow council members. This is an imminent need. I'm phenomenally impressed with the what the course staff and Kemper Sports has been able to do, not having these already available to them. They're really, I mean, they're in some ways kind of pulling a rabbit out of a hat, pretty much on a daily basis. And the thing that struck me the most in taking that very eye-opening tour was one of the major concerns I had was potential safety issues, especially with the carts. I think that we've been really fortunate that not we, the city, but the community has been very fortunate that that there haven't been any issues, according to the general managers, as far as safety concerns to this point. But we certainly don't want to have that possibility as the carts get older. So I'm completely supportive of this, having had those conversations at length, and really appreciate all the hard work that everyone from the city and Kemper and the staff at the course have put into this process so far.
And council, I know it will be the intention to have a more in-depth conversation about the rest of the items in the report. Just safe it to be that this was the first big item on the list that was there, but there's many more conversations to be had about the rest of the priorities moving forward. And for the record, Councilman Kavner joined us at 4:39, roughly in this conversation. So I don't know how much he's heard, or if he needs any refresh on anything. But Councilman Kavner, any questions or comments?
Mr. Mayor, I won't ask Mike to rehash. Apologies to the council for being late. Mike, thanks for sending the report to me this morning. Look forward to being able to read that this week. And Mike, you may have touched on this, or perhaps Mary, you may have touched on it. If not, I think it's an important conversation that we need to have just about the fee recovery plan for the golf course. I think Councilmember Pearl hit the nail on the head, in that we've been able to get by, very luckily without any major issues. And I appreciate that staff are bringing forth their concerns. My hope is just that the financial plan to resolve those concerns is being brought in parallel to the plan to recover the fees or the costs associated with many of these pieces of equipment that we need to buy.
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Kavner, we are in the process of putting together an operating budget that also has a revenue forecast to go along with it. And there's a lot of back and forth that we're doing right now with staff at the courts and Kemper Sports. And we don't have a lot of financial history to go on. So in some ways, this operating budget that we're currently about halfway through is somewhat hypothetical, but the goal is to create as much revenue as we possibly can and be conservative with our expenses.
And as was mentioned, to try to put the money into the right buckets where it makes sense to cover the costs associated with those elements. I mean, right now, based upon the numbers you mentioned earlier, I'm like, I gotta think that our cost recovery on this investment, it'd be interesting to know what that is. But to your point, we don't have the financial model for a year of operation to know how long would it take us to recover this investment and these costs, and then put in the other elements. But that's all stuff that we can build, I think, over time, and that's what we all want to know.
Yeah. And Mr. Mayor, I think it's, Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it's a good conversation for maybe a future workshop for us as a council to have with finance department and the parks department. You know, we probably have a different threshold for a fee recovery for a golf cart rental than we do for the facility at large. And making sure that at least this body's all kind of have the same expectations about that, I think could be beneficial as we embark on this new endeavor.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Pearl.
Councilman Kavner, if I may also share the staff and Kemper have been looking for some ways to become more efficient. So they've identified several inefficiencies, including within the restaurant and the bar, within the maintenance shop, and they're already starting to make some changes to how, you know, from how much food is ordered, to trying to minimize waste, to uses of space. They're already working on that. I think it sounded to me like some of the staff are even taking some initiative that we just on their own, is my understanding, and Mr. Barton can correct me for sure, but that's my understanding from the general manager. So I'm really happy to see that. And I think those will all add up, you know, in the future, and seeing what kind of progress we can make toward having a facility, a course and a facility that operate more cleanly and with greater revenue.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Schrader.
Sure, Mr. Mayor, thank you. Yeah, I'm supportive. We agreed because we owned the golf course that we were going to run a capital intensive business, and that's the kind of business that this is. And we would need to make these investments, whether we operated this golf course long term or even if we decided to ultimately exit it, to get and realize the highest value for this asset. So regardless of our future plans, I view these investments as necessary to be a good steward for the city. I am supportive.
Thank you very much. Council, they already have the spending authority, or they already have the budget in place, so we do not need something specific unless council would like to make a motion giving direction. Otherwise, I think they have what they need from this conversation. Okay.
Good.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks, Mike. And with that, we will move on to item number 26, which is the fire department regarding the discussion of fire stations 7 and 8. I will turn this over to Chief Bloom.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and City Council members. It's really a privilege to get to present and talk on this subject this evening on behalf of the Meridian Fire Department. And in the 6 weeks that I've been here, there's been a conversation that's sort of been very organically happening, and it's been around growth. And interestingly enough, as a brief analogy, when we develop as fire officers, we're taught to read smoke and the scale of an incident based on the volume, velocity, and density of smoke. But I think that there's a corollary with the city of Meridian in the amount, the volume, velocity, and density of growth that the city of Meridian has experienced. And certainly this discussion is about areas of service that can be delivered by fire stations 7 and 8. And so when we look at that, we're talking about two very specific pieces of property. Station 7, which is the Lake Hazel and Eagle property, which is down in the southeast portion of Meridian, and the McDermott and McMillan area for Station 8. Let's see here, sorry. Okay. Sorry, this is dancing out of queue. And so this is what the proposed schematic look, top-down view of what the two stations. They're of course a co-located location with Meridian Police Department as well as the Meridian Fire Department. And so what's important to start looking at is this growth that Meridian has experienced. And when we look at that, we look at the trends that over the past 15 years, Meridian has experienced an 8% growth annually. Now, what that is correlated in is an increase in call volume to the city of Meridian, calls for service from the fire department. Interestingly enough, in 2020, and according to our annual report, we had 9,525 apparatus responses to service the citizens of the community of Meridian. As the city of Meridian is well aware, we have a agreed upon 5-minute response model that we're shooting for. Unfortunately, we're nowhere near that. We're not even close. From last year, we had an average response time of 6 minutes and 35 seconds. Working with my team, we wanted to dive deeper in that and look at the analytics behind that and see if that was an accurate representation, a good capture of the service that we were able to deliver currently to the community of Meridian. What we've noticed is the number to date is 6 minutes and 16 seconds. Once again, nowhere near that 5-minute response time. Now, what's important and what is not captured in this is also in the contract that there is the 5-minute response time, but there's also a 90-second shoot time that is the allowance of from the time the 911 call comes into the fire station to the time our firefighters are responding on that piece of apparatus. They're given 90 seconds. Our firefighters are doing a great job. They're nowhere near that number. They're at 1 minute and 5 seconds. So they're beating the expected 90-second response time. But when we add 1 minute and 5 seconds on top of 6.5 minutes, we're approaching an 8-minute window where people are receiving the emergency response that they were hoping for. Now, I was really kind of concerned with these numbers, and I think that the city would be concerned with those as well as the citizens as well. But then also, I reached out to some of our regional partners to kind of verify or validate, make sure that this just wasn't anecdotal information, that there was actually something there. I was able to speak with the chief of Ada County Paramedics, John Rain, and he provided me these 2 heat maps. And I think these 2 heat maps illustrate his concern as well. In 2019, what we would see is that the locus of calls is generated in the downtown Boise area. However, in a 1-year period, though, he's noticed a shift from the downtown Boise area to the city of Meridian as being the highest demand and the highest draw of call volume for the Ada County paramedics. So much so that talking with Chief Rain, he has asked to co-locate a paramedic unit at either Station 6 or at a future Station 7. He's so interested because he doesn't have the ability to buy land, build a facility, and staff that facility to service the community of Meridian in a timely manner. Another piece of information that's important to note that supports the idea that we can do better is the response reliability rating that the City of Meridian has from the fire department. City of Meridian Fire Department, even with the addition of Station 6 last year, is still have a response reliability in the high 70s to low 80s. Now, what that means is when a call in an area comes into the fire department, how often is the unit that is in that area going on that call? The gold standard and what we're shooting for and what we're really hoping for is to be in the 85th percentile. That's a really, really high rating. But being in the high 70s and low 80s, we need to do better. And interestingly, even with the addition of Station 6 last year, the collective trend down is about 3% drop in our response reliability. There's an additional piece that's really important for our business community as well as our residential community, and that is looking at the ISRB rating or the Idaho Surveying and Rating Bureau. Currently, the city of Meridian is at a 3, and it's a low 3. We're coming in right around the 73rd percentile in that ISRB rating. What is interesting about that is a composite score. It's based on several factors, one of which is communications, another is water distribution, water supply. The third piece is community risk reduction and our prevention efforts. And finally, the fire department. The fire department is heavily weighted. It's given a 50% value, while the other ones make up that other 50% composite. City of Meridian is almost perfect in all other areas in the sense of water supply comes in at 100%. Communications with Ada County and the dispatch network is at 100%. Our prevention and community risk reduction is at 88%. The fire department's at a 66%. Most specifically, and what is highly problematic about that and what drags that number so far down is the lack of ladder truck service to the community. the distribution of our resources, meaning the need for additional stations, and then of course the company personnel to staff those stations. So being able to elevate a ISRB rating from a low 2 to a 2, I'm sorry, from a low 3 to a 2 has a reciprocal impact to the community in reduced insurance rates for commercial and residential businesses. So ultimately, we're in the business of saving lives and property, and it's in that order. And if we look at the volume of calls in our community, we're not just burning homes. Homes aren't, and businesses aren't suffering losses. But as you can see, the majority of the calls that we're going on are medical calls. And in that sense, very much so, time is tissue. From an epidemiological perspective, the morbidity and mortality rates exponentially increase beyond that 5-minute window that we're struggling to maintain. So the addition of 2 fire stations and the addition of the personnel and the equipment to staff those things is essential and critical to the public safety of the city of Meridian. So the recommendation that myself, my team, and the Meridian Fire Department are making is that we build stations 7 and 8 simultaneously. This is for several reasons. Most importantly is that it improves that response reliability time to a larger area. We're going to reduce the loss of life and property. There is, in fact, a cost savings to the Meridian taxpayer, and we'll be able to fully utilize the impact fees. And this building both of these stations moves us on a very clear path to an improved ISRB rating. With an alternate to that recommendation, I'm recommending that we build Fire Station 7 first. It will improve the response reliability, but to a single area of need. I have Marv from the Rural Fire District here this evening to speak on any concerns regarding their commitment to contributing to supporting staffing costs for 12 firefighters over a 20-month period. Additionally, we have Chief Rain has expressed more than interest, but a commitment to be a stakeholder in Ada County paramedics co-locating one of their paramedic units at Station 7. And probably the biggest detractor of just building one station is it really doesn't move the needle toward improving our ISRB rating. Just will keep us at that 3. So ultimately, I guess what I'm asking from the mayor and the city council is some direction for my team moving forward. As we build out our budget, we're looking for the direction. Are we building 2 stations? Are we building 1? Or are we not building any this year? So at this point, I'll stand for questions from mayor and council.
Thank you, Chief Bloom. I'll reserve my remarks till later in the conversation. See if council has any questions for Chief Bloom at this time.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
thank you, Chief Bloom, for that direct question. Are we building 1, 2, or none? I like that. I like that. It's you're definitely not beating around the bush. I like that approach. So first question that I have we actually purchased the property for the fire station in the Northwest? Is that under wraps, or is that ongoing? Is that done?
I'm going to look to my team here. We have purchased it. State.
Well, that would be
No, I'm sorry. That'd be Station 8. So
That property's been purchased.
Quick.
Station 8, it hasn't closed yet, but we're waiting for the plat to be recorded and then it will close.
Oh, so it's really close. I mean, we got property. We're ready to roll pretty much.
Exactly, and that's for Station 8
Gotcha.
in the Northwest.
Perfect. So the next question I have is, we don't, as a city, have a perfect track record as it relates to construction projects. And I'm not even just talking about the fire department and fire stations. And so Station 6, how do I say this? It probably could have been done better. All right. So my reservation is, can we handle the construction management of 2 stations at one time? Is that, and I know I met with Chief Butterfield, and it's a much different process than it was before when I was new and didn't know what the questions were to ask during that time. But I just need confirmation on the record that we're, first off, and it's okay to state what your concerns are. I mean, it's okay to, if you have concerns, I'd like to know what those concerns are and how we can help you with them. And so 2 stations at one time is a big task, in my opinion. I just want to make sure we're good to go. And if there's anything as a council we can do to help with that process, if that's where we're going to go.
Councilman Burnt, I've had these conversations. Certainly, I agree with your concern. I think that there were some lessons learned from Station 6. But I say that to say this. I've spoke with my team as well as Mr. Edmond, and we have every bit of confidence that we'll be able to execute this supremely and on time and on budget.
And if I could add to that, from conversations that have also been had, I think what Chief Butterfield has done a great job of is laying out a plan where, again, we're going to try to deliver on the dates that it says, but if something gets delayed, we know where to delay other things along the process so that we don't experience the same challenges that came with the last one from that standpoint.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Thanks, Chief. So, yeah, I've read it. I've met with folks a little bit. I'm starting to feel a little bit better about the execution risk if we have milestones for construction and so forth. What I want to understand, I think, if we go back to the slide that sort of shows a growth around these 2 areas, is how boxed in are we in terms of developments that have already been approved that are outside of that 5-minute response time in these 2 areas? If we could kind of narrow in on what that amount is for things that, again, they've been approved, they're happening. What is the quantity of homes or buildings, whatever you have in these 2 areas?
Like Chief Butterfield to share his screen, as he always does a good job of pulling that up. I'm sorry, Chief Bongiorno. I apologize. I was looking at one, the other one, but Chief Bongiorno was on, I know, online.
I was going to be impressed, actually.
Mr. Mayor, give me just one moment. I'm pulling it up right now. I saw it coming. Okay, here we go. All right, can you guys see the map now? Did the map come up?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. So in this area, sorry, Chief, if you don't mind, I'll start. So in this area where Station 7 sits, the biggest project that has been approved that's outside of that area is this corner here at Lake Hazel and what is that, Locust Grove. We have this big area that's being developed right now where our response times, we are well outside. Just, we barely touch that one area. And then we also have this whole subdivision that's existing that also falls outside of our response time. We just saw a project here that came in Tuesday night that was denied, that they're trying to come in, that's outside, part of it is outside of our response time. That first map that showed the 2 stations with the area of response, again, those show that there's numbers in the center of those maps, and that shows everything that's been approved that's coming that will be covered by these 2 fire stations. So again, if we click on the future I mean, when we add that station, everything turns green, which is good. So again, that's with it or without it, and that's what it looks like with it. It's not an exact science, but it's pretty close. And then on the Northwest station,
And Chief,
again, we have, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna put out, I think Century Hill Farm, most of that subdivision area that's already built was also outside the 5-minute.
Correct. Yeah. So this whole area right here, again, you can see with and without it, it's going to cover a lot of this area as well. We all know we've seen projects in this square mile here, McMillan and Black Cat and McDermott. All of these areas are outside of our response time. Plus, we have the high school that's outside of our response time as well that's being built. So we already have projects that have been approved that are outside of our response times. So as we continue to grow, that's the issue, that the hard part that I'm having with my reports is we're getting outside of these zones, and all I can say is, yeah, we can service it, but what's it going to look like? That's the issue.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Schrader.
Yeah, totally get that. And I have a philosophy that I think we can take the lessons learned, and when it comes to areas of Meridian that we really have not developed yet, especially in that kind of southwest corner, I think it would be great for us philosophically to talk about waiting and kind of catching up before we approve into that zone for this reason. I want to understand what the number of buildings are in those two areas that we have already approved. Because I sort of look at it like there's a financial aspect, and I understand the inflation argument. I'm not sure how much weight I give that. We could get into that, but what I do give a lot of weight to is how much have we already approved that we've committed to providing services in those areas. How many buildings do we have in these areas that are outside of the 5 minutes? And then take that in with the reliability factor. And yeah, obviously a high school, right? But wanted to get those numbers just so I could kind of crystallize that.
Yeah, Chief, can you go back to that map that showed 7 and 8? That guy right there. So, Mr. Mayor and Councilwoman Schrader, that map right there shows currently in that south area, we have 9,130, I think they called it doorways or entities out in that area. The day when Doug Green created this map for us, we had 3,582 future doorways, structures, dots on the books. And it's the same with the Northwest. We had 3,853 dots in the books, and then we had an additional 3,000 that had been approved that were coming. So that was kind of what this map was to represent, to show that, we have 9,000 items on the list, whether it's doorways, rooftops, I can't remember exactly what it was. I'd have to go back and read my email, but that was the purpose of this map, was to kind of show that, hey, these areas are growing and we have a lot coming in the south and in the Northwest.
Right.
And this map's, I believe, about 6 months old now.
Sure, and we've got Pinnacle and a bunch of additional developments. So just to summarize, I view us as morally obligated to try to figure this out. I want to understand what the levers are that we can pull financially and through the construction process. And I went through this with Deputy Chief Butterfield, but that there are milestones along the way where, for example, we wouldn't be hiring a full station of firefighters if we're not delivering our, CO on time. Or we're going to have a milestone where I want to understand that from the fire chief, from you, Chief Bloom. I want to hear that you're going to be like, just like Councilman Burnt said, but you're like laser on it. So each time there's a milestone that's not being met, we're not creating a financial hole for ourselves by committing to additional costs, especially in labor, if something's not going okay, and that you'd be keeping us really closely updated. Obviously, I would be as council liaison, but that we'd be really like synced up on it. If you could just address those things.
Councilwoman Strader, yes, I would absolutely agree with you that the work that Chief Butterfield has done in producing the Gantt charts is fantastic, and it does in fact address and put on a very clear and delineated timeline, milestones, and I like, as you put it, levers that indicate when things fall into place. It trips actions to move forward within the project, and not until those milestones are met does the the preceding event take place. And certainly, to your point with the hiring of personnel and staff, that is pushed very far off into the future with regard to being assured that the station is online, the apparatus is there, and that we're able to put the right people in the right seats at the right time. So again, I would go back and say with what Chief Butterfield did with those Gantt charts really makes it very easy to follow and understand and track.
And if I could just follow up with a couple of comments. One of the things when the chief and I were talking about which the Northwest or the Southeast should move forward, it was really focusing in on the amount of buildings that were already there that would be serviced. That, I think that's what I heard was really one of the things that pushed over. Now, subsequent to that, there's been additional conversations with Chief Rain as well that that help contribute to that. What that map didn't, I think, show that maybe I heard you were asking was how many dwelling units are outside of the 5-minute response area right now. That might be something interesting to figure out for the future to kind of put it in larger perspective, because a lot of the stuff in the South is already covered by Station 6 and 5, not completely. So there is a little bit of that, but same with the Northwest. I think some of that is also covered by other stations as well. And for the record, Councilman Hoagland joined us at 5:10 for this conversation. Council, further questions for Chief Bloom?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Perot.
Thank you very much. I'd like to invite the chief. I noticed that he didn't go over in detail the numbers that were included in the packet for our review. And so if there's anything in there that he would like to point out to us in terms of a cost and or savings differences between the first and second options, I'd like to hear from him directly on that. And then just wanted to say I agree with the mayor that it would be interesting to see how many of these approved future properties or doors are currently outside of the 5-minute response time. I don't know. I'd like to see that information. I don't know if that is the #1 factor for me in this decision, but it would be, I think it would, any kind of data that we can have to help us make this decision, and is specifically regarding the timeframes that are presented in these two different options would be helpful. So if Chief Bloom could share his thoughts on that, I would appreciate it.
Councilwoman Perot, thank you for the question. Yes, with regard to the anticipated or prospected cost savings, we're looking at an anticipated cost savings of the concurrent builds being a tax savings, or I'm sorry, a savings of between $1.2 million and $1.3 million based on economies of scale of building 2 stations simultaneously, the purchase of 2 fire trucks, volume purchasing essentially, would be in about an estimated $18,000 savings for purchasing 2 at once. And then there is the anticipated inflation over a 3-year period with the separation in the 2 projects. And so if we're looking at $7 million over 3 years with a 5% annual inflation, that's $1 million right there in savings for the simultaneous build. But truthfully, for more specifics on the budget piece of it, I would refer to the finance, Todd Lavoy. I don't know if he has anything to add to that piece, but that's the anticipated savings right off the top for building the 2 stations.
Mr. Mayor, a follow-up, if I may.
Councilman Pro.
Thank you, Chief Bloom. Is there anything you'd like to add about the staffing, the timing of the staffing of these 2, and if there's any costs? There are any cost benefits to staffing, interviewing, hiring? I assume they wouldn't be exactly at the same time, because you, even in the first scenario, you wouldn't start construction immediate, in the same month. But if you could give me some clarification on how the staffing would work and how the funding would work, and any significant differences between the 2 proposals.
With regard to the staffing, there's a couple of things. So internally, there needs to be promotional processes, which are already underway, to develop internal lists to fill the roles of the engineer captains, as well as establishing a list for eligible battalion chiefs. And that is already underway and in process. There is no cost associated with that, because those are just lists of people eligible to move into those higher ranks. With regard to the onboarding of staff, working with my team, we've talked about doing a 2-tiered approach, one of which, and this is a huge cost savings, or potentially huge, and I don't like using that word, but I'll use it not in an exaggerated term, but in a literal sense, that if we're able to hire one group that can come to the Meridian Fire Department as a lateral transfer, coming to us, the city of Meridian, with their firefighter credentials and their paramedic rank, that shortens the period of time that we need to run a fire academy. That shortens the duration of time that they are hired, and lessens the amount of time that we're paying them to be in a fire academy versus bringing them into an active role. Those are a couple of things that we've looked at. With regard to, I would say, offsetting the cost of staff to the Station 7, which is at Lake Hazel and Eagle Road, we've had an open dialogue and a conversation, and that's why I have Commissioner from the Rural Fire District here this evening to speak if you have any additional questions for him regarding a commitment or a discussion and dialogue about funding 12 positions for the first 20 months to staff that station in the south.
And just from a very practical standpoint, as a rule, we'll make that determination. It doesn't have any bearing on the cost savings to the city, because I think it's whether you do 1 or 2. If the one in the south moves forward, that remains the same. But what it does do is it provides additional service to our residents for 20 months. And what is the value of that, if you want to call it savings or other things? There is an operational cost, but it is a service delivery for up to 2 years.
Correct. And Mr. Mayor, I believe that the number that we were discussing is approximately $1.2 million.
Mr. Mayor.
Let me see if there's anybody else who would like to speak first, as we have 3 council members have yet to engage.
I'm happy to hear from Councilmember Strader. I've got some questions, but if she's on to something, I'm happy to wait, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Borton.
Mr. Mayor, I kind of want to dovetail on that, on the savings question, and I've got concerns. The answer to your very first question is you do Station 7 and you go now and you get one done. And one of the reasons I get to that conclusion is when we talk about savings, 1 versus 2 at the same time, it looks like from the numbers in the report on the issue of money saved by doing it quicker, if we assume all that to be true, accelerating the labor cost for the second station quicker than you would if you did them separate, more than consumes all the savings. So doing 2 together doesn't net save anything. And that still might be fine, but and finance is on and they can correct me, but it looked like you're, even with the rules contribution, which is the same regardless, which is fantastic, it seemed like accelerating the labor costs that we would pick up quicker by doing 2 stations engulfs the savings. So I guess the first question is, am I off on that proposition, or is it more that the recommendation is do 2 stations at the same time? You're not going to save any net money, but it's still appropriate for other non-monetary reasons.
Councilman Borton, I will defer that question to Todd. However, I do agree with the assessment that it's for non-monetary reasons to build both stations.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Borton, I'm happy to give my thoughts on Mr. Borton's comments. Again, as long as we have the contribution from the rural fire as we've discussed in our meetings, and our timeline stands as is, dollars out of the pocket for the city of Meridian should be pretty even. I mean, there might be a few dollars that we might spend a little bit more if we do accelerate the bringing on the station, but the way Robert and Chris and myself have set this up, we feel that the total cost out of the pockets of the citizens should be equal on the 2 stations being deployed at the same time.
Mr. Mayor, let me put a point on
Councilman Borton.
where I'm missing it. Thanks. So if you're either hiring, all things being equal, 12 firefighters or 24 firefighters. And it's that second 12 firefighters that are being hired 24 months earlier than they otherwise would be hired. You've got 24 months of labor costs, the $1.7 million of ongoing labor costs times 2 that you wouldn't incur during year 1 and 2 if you hired them in year 3. And it's that's $3 million of labor costs that you incur doing them together that you don't incur by doing them separate. And that's what seemed to engulf any savings in construction costs and fire engines cost, et cetera. So am I correct? Now,
Councilman
What you-
Borton, if I-
yeah.
I could just sort of correct. If we did the station up in Northwest first, then that throws it all out of the water, because then the rules contribution could change dramatically and it may or may not exist, or when it may exist may be a question. So part of it could be timing, part of it could be location, and part of it could be which one goes first. We have the recommendation from the chief, obviously, for the one in the south. If council said, nope, we're going north, I don't know what the rural's contribution would be, when or if, which could change the numbers that you're talking about from that standpoint.
Okay. I appreciate that. So assuming for this illustration that 7 in the south goes, and assuming the rural contribution goes, then doing 8 quicker and incurring those labor costs for 8 quicker has a greater net expense than if you did them separate. I mean, it's $1.5 million a year times 2 years.
Yes, it seems that would be the case.
Todd, did that clarify, or am I off still?
Again, we will incur more costs because now you're running 2 stations as opposed to 1 station. So you're going to have operational costs for the second fire station, which would not have existed if you didn't build it until there. So yes, I agree with you there. You will incur additional operations costs. Again, it's all about the timing on how we do the staffing of the 2 stations, because we do have a very generous possible donation from the rural fire district. And if that is meeting our timelines, we can schedule it so that that rural fire contribution allows for the coverage of that additional cost that you're speaking of, because you are bringing them on earlier. It should, if we do it correctly, it should bear 0 cost difference to the citizens of the city, because we'll start the actual paying of our tax dollars to our fire union members at the exact same date if we just open the station at that later time frame. It really falls on us on how we do the timing of that.
And I think it goes back to the point that was made before. There is a cost for every service, and it's a question whether or not the additional 18 to 24 months of service has that value. Is that worth the value? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Because you are correct. There are extra costs, there are savings, there are costs, there are things, but what is the value, whether it's real in terms of service? What is the value of the service to the calls? What is the value of the ISBR rating to taxpayers? There's all sorts of other elements which are tangible and not tangible from a financial standpoint to the city.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Borden.
that's, for me at least, just clarifying that. It's not, the monetary argument to do two at once didn't make sense. It didn't provide a net savings. Again, there may be other reasons to not do it or to do it two at a time, but it wasn't a money thing. I'll stop with that question
And I think
other
there was the unpopular thing, but the construction and purchase does save the money. You could always build it and choose not to staff it for a year or two afterwards. I know that's not a popular thing, but from a cost savings, it would provide a construction cost savings, but not an operational cost savings.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Kavner.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. First, Chief Bloom, pick a heck of an agenda topic that'd be before the city council for the first time. What a wild 6 weeks. I want to talk a little bit because I hadn't considered the ISBR rating. And I'm not going to ask you to kind of look historically about that rating in Meridian, but I'm hoping maybe some of the staff or Mr. Mayor, you may have some background. I recall a time, maybe it was like 2011, where we were ranked 2. We had a 2 rating. We dropped from a 3 to a 2. So what caused us to go from a 2 to a 3? And what guarantees do we have that once we do this, that a year or two later, we don't move back up to a 3? I'm not quite sure who I'm directing that question to, because I'm not sure who is equipped to answer, but it's a piece that is kind of landed since I've seen the presentation.
Chief Bloom is more than prepared to answer that question.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Kavner, yes, you are correct. There was a point where Meridian had an ISRB rating of a 2. However, due to a increase, again, using the word explosive increase in the community, in businesses and in residential structures and just people, that ISRB rating is now out of tune, so to speak. So we have more people, more occupancies, and more businesses. And because of that, the fire department hasn't experienced the commensurate growth that would go along to accompany that. So the fire department is in a little bit of a not being proactive. We're very reactionary at this point in trying to regain lost ground as far as the size and the ability of the fire department. And again, that's where the ISRB rating is weakest. In fact, it is the only area that would prevent the city of Meridian from being a 1. Because again, and I have the report here in front of me and I can provide it to council if you'd like to look at the most recent one. It was from 2019. Again, our ability to distribute water via hydrants and water systems, the ability to inspect those systems, our community risk reduction programs, our prevention programs, our enforcement programs are at 100%. The communications network that Ada County that we enjoy with being partners with Ada County is at 100%, but our fire department is the thing that's sinking in the sense that it's at 66%. And some of the areas of our performance are in the 30s and 40s. And so those numbers aren't arbitrary. They're basically derived from looking at best case scenarios and best models to deliver the highest level of fire protection to a community. And so there are no ISRB 1 communities in Idaho. I believe there's one that is currently a 2, and everybody else falls down below that. Now, interestingly enough, so what does that mean to the community, and what is the benefit to the residential and business community? And what I was able to do is work with insurance.com and basically extrapolate an example of a benefit of an increased ISRB rating to the community of Meridian. So for an example, and I'm going to read here in a paraphrase sense, that if the city of Meridian Fire Department had an ISRB rating of class 2, and in Meridian, a home insurance policy that could rebuild a $350,000 home and cover $100,000 in liability with a $1,000 deductible, would run an average of $1,050, according to insurance.com, their analysis of rates from 8 area insurance companies. In comparison, where the fire department has an ISRB rating of a class 6, that same coverage would cost an individual $1,336. And in rural areas of Idaho where they have a class 8B rating, the cost is $1,416 on average. So it benefits the residents in the community of Meridian to have a higher ISRB class rating from a financial standpoint, as well as from a service delivery perspective. And that's, again, this is just from residential perspective. A lot of things go into determining that number, the age of the home, the square footage of the home. And then there's a different metric for commercial businesses, and commercial businesses actually enjoy a much greater benefit of an enhanced ISRB rating.
Councilman Kavner, one thing that the chief shared with me earlier was, because I said, well, you used a 6 and a 2. Well, we're a 3. They tend to group their ratings together. So it doesn't sound like we can just get like, well, what if we're a 4 versus a 2? You know, and so I take that with a grain of salt, that there could be a nexus of $300 difference, 200, 100. It's hard to say from a practical standpoint without doing more work, but yes.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, one additional
So,
question,
Kevin.
if I may. Obviously, the bulk of our conversation this afternoon has focused on the 2 fire stations, but at least in one of the slides, it's conceived again this dual purpose campus. Where is PD in these types of conversations? And I don't think, regardless of whatever type of direction council is going to provide, it's not being done in a vacuum about fire stations only. So where and when does the conversation about police substations come into the conversation?
Chief Boone?
Councilman Kavner, I don't know that I'm the most appropriate person to speak on behalf of the Meridian Police Department, but from a planning perspective, maybe Ms. Redmond could answer something on those lines.
Maybe Councilman Kavner, I could start off. These are not, the way this is being built is that the decisions made here today don't have an impact on the police department because the buildings are separated from a very practical standpoint. And from my conversations with the chief, I know that they're more interested in the Northwest station going first than the Southeast station. And of course, there has been many previous budgets approved for this purpose. So, but I'll turn it over to Ms. Redmond and see if she has anything to add.
Mr. Mayor, you are correct. They are more interested in the Northwest. I know that they're looking at, when they would bring it on in the South. But that's conversations that we haven't been privy to, so I can't speak to that.
Councilor Kavner, you may not have heard that, but
Yeah.
basically what I said is what was the case at this point in time is they're looking more at the Northwest at this time without a specific Southeast timeframe.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, just a comment. I appreciate the response from Stacy and from you. It will be really challenging for me, I think, to provide a lot of clear direction or recommendation from my standpoint, because the fire station pieces are only one part of an overall puzzle. Especially if this is the direction that PD wants to go and fire wants to go, is kind of this shared campus model. It just opens, I think it creates more questions than answers.
Councilman Kavner, maybe the best thing to try to do mentally is draw a line, because there is a line between the two, and view them as separate projects and applications long-term, because that's essentially what it will be. Even the police, how they're going to be utilized is going to be different. They can bring on the buildings without bringing on staff and other requirements. So it may be a financial timeframe about when it makes sense. But we can ask the chief to come and talk about these in the future, about his plans for both of these. From that standpoint, I know it may not be easy, but that'd be my request, is try to bifurcate shared property, but different purposes, and different, different purposes for the buildings, even from that standpoint.
Okay.
Mayor?
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Hoagland.
Yes, thank you. Apologies for being late. Work commitment kept me from being here to hear the bulk of the presentation, but I'm very familiar with what's going on serving as fire liaison last year. But I do want to ask, and this may have been addressed earlier, and that is the time frame for the council to make a decision on this. And based on the legislature going back into session for approximately 2 weeks, are we going to wait until we know what the status of property taxes are before we make any decision?
Chief, I'll spare you that one from that standpoint. It is my intention to bring both of these forward in the upcoming budget for your consideration. That's unless I hear a resounding no from council right now that you're not even willing to consider it. So you will have through the budget process to make that determination. Hopefully by then we will know the outcome from the legislature. But my conversations with the CFO, sometimes called the CFNO, we will make adjustments and modifications based on what the legislature does to our long-term needs. I think from a very practical standpoint, what I've learned through this, for the last 15 months and maybe before then, is we've made contracts with people out there for service to be provided. We have homes that are built, significant homes. We have schools that are built. We need to find a way to provide that service. And hey, if people are open to have other ideas on how to provide a fire service, in a timely fashion, I'm all ears. But until they invent a new way to do it, it's going to require 2 stations with people, and we're 3 years away. We're 2 years away if we're lucky from now. So again, we will work, we will adapt. I will work with the team to make sure that we have a financially viable way to pay for these things. We'll make adjustments to the CFP. We got to do that no matter what. Everything that we get from Todd is a projection. Those projections can change. Sometimes they go way up. Sales tax revenue, way up, till the legislature goes and changes it. So there does become a point in time where you have to make a plan forward, and as circumstances change, react and modify appropriately. But I think we're at that point in time, personally, where it's appropriate to consider this through our budget in this upcoming year. Unless I hear a resounding no from 3 or 4 council members today.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilwoman Perot.
just one more question. I was reviewing the 2 different proposals again, and I noticed in the second proposal there's 2 or 3 times the comments that the CFP, what is set aside in the CFP is already scheduled to make that second proposal work. But I didn't see a lot of commentary regarding how the CFP would need to be adjusted to make the first proposal work. And I apologize if that's already been shared, but I don't know who would like to answer that question, or if that question is too early to be answered.
Mr. Lavoy.
Mr. Mayor, the Councilwoman Perot, the CFP, the way we developed it is we are assuming that there will be a contribution of a rural district partnership. And we estimated based on the timeliness of when we hire the second station that the CFP will not need to be adjusted really at all if we stick with the timelines that we have kind of projected. So when the rural fire contribution expires, that's when the citizens will then start paying, the city of Meridian citizens would start paying the payroll for the station, the second station that we're referring to. That timing in the CFP, Robert and I worked on it. It should be aligned so that you will see no impact on either timing that you do. But we did put in the CFP the split because we did not want to make the assumptions that we had a revenue source from a secondary intergovernmental agency. So that's why it's in the CFP the way it is. But if you're able to build that relationship with rural fire, then we'll add the revenue stream, we'll move the expenses forward, and you should not really see too much of a difference in your 5-year forecast.
Mr. Mayor,
Thank
Councilman
you.
Barrett.
if you don't mind, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to have Commissioner Ward come up and explain, maybe give some thoughts in regard to the rural. Their contribution that has been spoke about is significant. And I just wanted to publicly thank the Rural Fire District on the record for their continued partnership with the city of Meridian and our fire department. They've been fantastic and gentlemen to work for in the past. So I just wanted to say thank you first off, but if you wanted to take a couple seconds to give your thoughts to us, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. As the representation of the Meridian Rural Fire Protection District, it's been our pleasure.
One second, Marv. Can you hear Marv? Can people hear Marv?
Sorry.
I think we're good.
Here, I'll take this off. Now you can hear me. See my ugly face. There you go. It's been our pleasure as a Meridian Fire Protection District over the last few years to be able to work with the Meridian Fire to purchase properties and to help buy things, equipment and things to help forward the protection of the rural fire protection in association with the fire department. We've purchased some properties that we have to anticipate these growths. We worked with fire department on Station 6. We donate or contributed to the funding of firefighters for that one to get that one going also. And we're talking about these things. As the Fire Protection District, we at this point are very concerned about this southeast section of our district, which is really where most of the Rural Fire Protection District is at right now. We're seeing these thousands of homes that are coming online, and the closest fire station on that side of the freeway is Overland, and then the one on Eagle and 4 and 6. So those have a response time, but they are way out there.
Yeah.
I was here a couple of weeks ago with a different hat on as a concerned citizen about a response time for my wife that we live out there that was 8 minutes. She wasn't breathing. So I was concerned about that, obviously. Knowing as my position as rural fire department chief or commissioner, that these times are too far out and we need to protect our citizens. We have a lot of response time now, and as that traffic and those homes, those doors come online, we are going to be fighting that even more. Our response time is not going to go down. It's just going to go up in the next couple of years as all these thousands of homes come online. So we're talking as a commission to work with you and the fire department to bring some monies in for firefighters to help staff the station that will protect that rural fire protection area. And we've always been trying to be the partner that we need to be and help with the needs of the Meridian city and to make that work. So, we're here to try to help, and hopefully, it benefits you. And I understand there's a lot of money flying around here and talking about that, but if we put that all together and work through the cycles, I think that we can make this work for the benefit of you and us as a rural fire protection.
Awesome.
Council, any questions? Thank you, Commissioner.
Thanks, Marv. Appreciate it, bud.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman Schrader.
Just a comment. I appreciate your comment about the budget. I think it is good to try to get to a spot where we formulate a consensus though earlier. And I feel like from the standpoint of making development decisions, this is a really important collective decision for us to figure out going forward. This piece at the legislature, I think, is a huge question. I assume that we would completely revisit all of this if that were to come to pass. But I just, I'm kind of getting at a spot where it's like, is it responsible to approve developments outside of the 5-minute response time if there is not funding in place for fire stations? I feel like we've been boxed in, partly not anyone's fault. We have a high school and we're addressing that partnership. We've got a high school that was there that opened up development and services. And we've got a ton of development in South Meridian that's already underway. It's already happening. We have homes there. And I'm going to go for the attempt to build 2 at once, knowing we could watch it really closely and try to remove that execution risk. I think I'm confident in the team that they're all over it from a different standpoint, but I do have to say, I view it as disorderly. I wish we didn't end up in a spot where we had to do 2 at one time. And I hope going forward that there are areas that are not priority growth areas, that'll help solve that problem going forward, because it's really unfortunate to be in a position to have to extend this much financially, I think, to protect the people living in the city.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
I want to thank Chief Bloom and Commissioner Ward and staff that are here to support and the information that was given this evening. Appreciate all of the discussion from council and from the mayor. It's been hugely beneficial for me. The one outstanding piece that I have is just our state legislature, to be completely honest with you. They're just really making it difficult for locals right now. And I'll just say it on the record. I've said it to some of their faces, so it's not a surprise. But I just hope and pray that we can come to an agreement at the state legislature in conjunction with the locals, so that we can continue to provide the services that our citizens expect, not only in the city of Meridian, but throughout the state. It's hugely important. So I don't know if I can give you direction tonight personally because of that, but I think that we have a little bit of time maybe to see what that looks like. At the end of the day, we need 2 fire stations. I don't think that there's any way of getting around it. I don't think there's a person that's sitting on this dais that has decision-making authority that would tell you otherwise. It's just a matter of how that works and how that plays out. So great presentation. Thank you, staff. And we'll see how this plays out.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
just a follow-up question for Todd. Mr. Lavoy, as I understand things, our concern isn't so much in the building and construction of the facilities. It's in the ongoing staffing needs and the costs associated with that in order to achieve the revenue projections to afford hiring for 2 stations, it required the city council to take our current foregone revenue as well as take the 3% as allowable by law for the next 4 years. Is my reading of that accurate, inaccurate, somewhat accurate?
Mr. Mayor, Councilman Cavanagh, the current comprehensive financial plan has the assumptions that the council for the next 5 years will take the full 3% allowable. We did not put any foregone assumptions into our revenue stream. But again, we did have the assumptions that the state would not change any legislature. The development would still follow kind of our plan. So those are the assumptions that we are managing within our comprehensive financial plan and the projections. As Robert stated, they are projections. That's the data that we have. And I completely support Mr. Burnt's comments and Mayor's comments that if the legislature decides to make some shifts in our revenue streams, we will be adaptable and we will not present to you anything that would put the city in any financial burden. Over the next 5 to 10 years, we will adapt and adjust our requests to you and to the citizens accordingly.
Mr. Mayor, follow up.
Councilman Cavanagh.
So that also then includes the assumptions that the other items that are listed on the CFP would still come forth as regular budget requests as part of the regular budget cycle. It's not the case of that we would take the 3% and wouldn't take on any other budgetary requests. We would still be able to take on budgetary requests as outlined in the CFP.
Correct, Luke. If all things stayed perfect and our assumptions were a 100%, the request would still be presented to you as is and as displayed in the comprehensive financial plan. Again, we will adjust our revenue projections. The CFP is completed in the month of November. We will be presenting to you the budget in the month of June. We will have new data and we will adapt our CFP according to any revenue increases or decreases. And we'll present to you what we believe is in the best interest of the citizens for fiscal 22 and the budget requests.
Okay, thanks, Todd.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Councilman Cameron, this is one of the reasons why, I've had some departments come and want to just increase numbers in the CFP.
Sure.
Because the building is now going to cost more. Well, it may, or we may have to build it for what we put in there, or we have to make adjustments. And I think that's the main thing I want all council. We are constantly making revisions and adjustments and having conversations. We try to only do it once a year, but the CFP is a guide. It's not a guarantee. And we will continue to make those adjustments. I can tell you, our sales tax revenue is way above all projections. Right now, legislature could adjust that too. So everything is a constantly moving target, and we did the best with what we got. But I think the question to council ultimately is, if you look at the CFP and what's asked for, what has a higher value than public safety, the police and fire needs, that's what we would look to first as far as adjustments when we start looking at revenue. But at the same time, fire department can't operate without operational assistance from many of our departments. So it's a fun game.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland.
Just real quick, I'm leaning towards 2. As been stated, we just need to wait and see what happens. So come June, we should have all that information, but right now I'm leaning towards trying to do 2.
Someone else looked to speak. I couldn't see who it was.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Kavner.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. And I think the reasons for some of my questions are clearly, I think the department has been a fine example of demonstrating the need for both stations. I think Councilmember Burnt hit the nail again on that. I don't think there's anybody that's disputing that we need to build 2 stations. Frankly, we should be starting to talk about an additional station as well. I mean, those conversations need to start to begin now. My only concern is about our ability to afford to be able to staff both stations. And again, it will come to no surprise to this body my reluctance about property tax increases foregone, and how we're able to achieve what I think the department and what Mr. Mayor, what you've lined out, that's in line with my reluctance to talk about property tax increases. So the other part I think it's important for us to note is, I think it's just a reality for us, is that every year there's going to be some type of action at the legislature that's going to impact us in one way, shape, or form. So I think that we've got to become a little bit more versatile in how we respond to that, recognizing that local government will always find, the best response possible to the actions of their state lawmakers. So we can't continue to only do our job for 6 months out of the year while we wait for the legislature to make their decisions. So I'm looking forward to the conversation this summer. I don't think that I've got a good direction on this. Go forth, do 1, go forth, do 2. Right now, I just don't have all the answers to the questions that are out there.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
When we first started down this path, having this conversation quite some time ago, my initial response was that I was favorable of building the 2 stations at the same time. for me, I would like to see if it's possible, a little more refinement on the numbers for the staffing. As Councilman Borton mentioned, I've also been having the same concerns about, whether there actually is any cost savings to do it at the same time because of the staffing. However, while I am not a member of the commercial construction community, I have enough involvement in the industry that I'm aware that the costs that are being proposed for increases in construction in 2 to 3 years, in my opinion, will be higher than 5%. So I think that that's a conservative number on what the cost increases will be if we wait and consider proposal number 2. I think we've underestimated what the additional expenses will be in 3 years. So I'm still currently leaning in the direction of wanting to see both be built at the same time. However, I have some reservation about whether our numbers are completely accurate, although I think they're as accurate as we can get at this moment in time. And at any point in the next few months, as we approach the budget process, I know that you and the fire department will be working on any new information that comes in that'll help us make a better decision, a clearer understanding of any costs associated that might change. So that's all I really have to add at this moment. I agree that we need to wait and see until the legislative session is over. However, I don't know that I think that's mostly going to be so that we can adjust likely other budgetary items because there is such an imminent need for these 2 stations.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
one final comment for me. I hope that the citizens of Meridian understand and realize that you have a council that doesn't just work 6 months out of the year. We work the entire year. And I hope that what Mr. Kavanagh said was in relation to what position that we've been put in by the state legislature, not necessarily how we've approached the situation. Just wanted to make that clear.
With that, council, any final comments? Okay, I thank you all for the frank, honest conversation. I think we all understand where we are and why, and understand that there's also, sometimes the unknown is scary. And at some point in time, that decision will have to be made. We'll continue to monitor, we'll continue to update. It'll be at least tentatively brought forward in this upcoming budget year unless something changes dramatically that puts the funding, but we'll be in contact. So with that, I would like to make sure we take a break before the next meeting and try to start that at 6:10, if that works for people. So do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
I have a motion second to adjourn. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.
love seeing this blue out here. I think we need the cheerleaders to come. You know? Big introduction.
All right. We got Councilman Hoagland in here, so we will go ahead and get started. And I appreciate people's indulgence to allow us that break for the rest of our meeting. So with that, council will come to order. For the record, it is April 6, 2021 at 6:12 p.m. We will begin tonight's regular city council meeting with roll call attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Borton?
Here.
Councilman Cavanagh?
Here.
Councilwoman Perot?
Here.
Councilman Hoagland?
Here.
Councilman Burnt?
Here.
Mayor Simison?
Here. Next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. If you'd all rise, and please join us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Our next item is the community invocation, which will be delivered by Rabbi Dan Fink this evening. If you would all please join us in this invocation or take this as a moment of silence and reflection. Rabbi Fink.
Thank you. We pray. Creator, sustainer, source of justice and mercy, we gather in this time, virtually and in person, to continue the work of creating compassionate and caring community. Guide the work of our hands, our heads, and our hearts, that it may promote the well-being of all the residents we are bound to serve to the very best of our abilities. Open our eyes to the beauty of this springtime season, to the hope it offers for renewal, healing, and growth. Grant us insight, courage, and dedication as we carry out the sacred calling of governance. May we recognize and honor the cherished ties that bind the entire body politic in a web of interdependence and shared responsibility. May our leaders lead not only with their words, but by their deeds and moral example in promoting the common good. Holy One, grant our leaders the wisdom to guide our future and the patience to secure it. May they govern with compassion for all whose destinies will be shaped by the decisions that they render. And let us say, Amen.
Thank you, Rabbi. Appreciate it. Council, next item is the adoption of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
no changes, so I adopt the agenda as published.
Mr. Mayor, second the motion.
I have a motion and a second to adopt the agenda as published. Is there any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. And the agenda is adopted. Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone signed up under public forum?
Mr. Mayor, we did not.
Okay, well, with that, we will move on down to the podium for a proclamation for Meridian High School Boys Basketball State Champions Day. If I could have the coach and players join me at the podium, it'd be great.
Flip it around. Yeah,
You want to look it up?
we're not important here. You guys are.
Well, Coach, if you think it's weird for you, I quit playing basketball about 5th grade. I think I learned my lesson early on from that standpoint. Excited for today. This is the 3rd high school in Meridian that has won a state championship this year, and have some of your cohort from the wrestling team coming in next week. So I just want to first give a shout out to the Warriors. I know going through years where you're adding new schools and seeing things change, but we're excited to have a great competition amongst all of our schools and many of all the sports. And we're excited to recognize you for your accomplishment today. Overall, it's been a great day. We got to start off with a little coffee with the mayor. We're getting back in in-person events. I know you guys got to get through the season, but congratulations on that. We're just going to do a reading of a proclamation, and then we have some pins for you, City of Meridian pins, that will hopefully you can wear, hold on to. But I'm going to do the version of the proclamation without your names, because even trying to just get past the first names can be sometimes a challenge. Jeff, I got that one. But your name, we do have a version of the proclamation that will be put into the record with all your names. So it will be at least on record here at the City of Meridian for all eternity. So after I do the proclamation, would love for each of you to come forward and state your name, the position you play. So we have that as well, and your year in school. And with that, we'll go ahead and do the proclamation. So whereas being a Meridian High School basketball player is more than scoring points, making assists, grabbing rebounds, stealing the ball, and achieving state titles. It is training to build leadership, character, confidence, teamwork, and resilience. All traits needed to succeed on the court, in the classroom, and in the real world. And whereas the Meridian Warrior basketball team spent the entire season as the 5A frontrunner and were able to complete the journey with the state title. And whereas their hard work and teamwork resulted in a 68-54 victory over Lake City High School in the 2021 state basketball championship tournament. And whereas the Meridian Warriors captured the 5A basketball state championship trophy, bringing home the first state boys basketball title since 1992. And whereas the leadership, training, and discipline of their coaches helped all team members to focus their talents and passion to become a winning team, with each player making valuable contributions to their victory. Therefore, I, Mayor Robert E. Simison, hereby proclaim April 6, 2021 as Meridian High School Boys Basketball State Champions Day. In the City of Meridian, call upon the community to join me in congratulating the Meridian High School Warriors on their remarkable athletic achievement and for representing Meridian so proudly in the state tournament, the 6th day of April, 2021. So with that, thank you and congratulations. And Coach, I'd love for you to say any comments you have about the team first before we ask them to come forward. And then afterwards, we'll do a quick picture with the proclamation.
Okay. Thank you very much. And this is quite a privilege. I think this is something they will remember forever. Again, I'd like to thank our principal, Jill Lillienkamp, and our athletic director, Mike Grafey, for supporting us all the way through. This is a tremendous group of young men. I didn't get to thank my coaches at the tournament. So here it is, Jason and Chad. They do a tremendous job along with some others that aren't here tonight. And we're very thankful for them. It was a great season. It was a challenging season with all the COVID challenges that we had to deal with, but these kids stayed disciplined, dedicated, and worked their tails off to bring a championship to Meridian. But more than anything, we preach citizenship, sportsmanship, and competitive excellence, and they're a fantastic walking example of that every single day. So thank you for this, and we're really appreciative of it. Okay, let's start here, and Ledoux, you can just say name and position, name, year, and position.
All right, my name is Ledoux Aiden, and I'm a junior, and I'm a point guard.
Max Gwilliam, I'm a sophomore, and I'm a shooting guard. Nathan Reynolds, I'm a sophomore, and I'm a center.
Kaden McKnight, junior, and I'm a guard.
Josie Sainer, and I'm the manager.
What year?
I'm a freshman.
There you go.
I'm Brock Vogley. I'm a junior. I play small forward.
I'm Davis Thacker. I'm a wing, and I'm a junior.
I'm Ethan Pierce. I play power forward, and I'm a junior.
I'm Brody Robery. I'm a forward, and I'm a senior.
I'm Brandon McDowell, shooting guard, and I'm a senior.
I'm Joe Mafoyo. I'm a senior, and I'm a shooting guard.
Drayson Fisher, senior, whatever position you need me.
McKay Anderson, senior, point guard.
I'm Colby Homer. I'm a forward and I'm a senior.
I'm Jack Moulton, a senior, small forward.
I'm Eric Moulton, and I play power forward, and I'm a senior.
Chad Delaney, assistant coach.
Jason Addison, assistant coach.
Yeah, I think Coach just asked for a COVID year for the seniors from that standpoint, but I don't think I have that power. But I'll bring it up with the school board chair when I talk to her next week. So if we just want to gather for a quick picture, and then Coach, I'll let you hand these out to your team afterwards. But very exciting. Congratulations. We love the blue and gold in this building. So we're going to be right up here in front of the podium.
Okay. Make sure we can see you, okay?
Well, Mr. Mayor, as they're departing, I just want to,
Councilman Hoagland.
I want to share my congratulations to them. And as an old alumni, and I do mean old, the current Meridian High School, we were the second class to graduate from that building. But I'm very proud of these young men and what they accomplished and the great year that they had. You know, the pressure mounts when you have a record like they have. Just ask Gonzaga. But they came through, and it's just so exciting to see these young men, and the coaches have such a great year, and they are just quality citizens, and I think they're going to be very successful in life, and so it's wonderful to see. So thank you.
Hear, hear. Okay, with that, council, we will move on to our public hearings for this evening. First item is public hearing for Cincy Warehouse 4 H 2021-0011. I will turn this over to Alan for staff comment, or open this public hearing with staff comments.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Oh,
Alan.
great, Alan. Terrific. Thank you. Okay, will be relatively quick. This is a request for an easement vacation to vacate a utility easement established along the interior lot line of Block 6 of the Gemtone Center. Property is located at the southwest of East Pine and Hickory Avenue. So here is the Cincy campus here. As you remember, Council, there's a development agreement that was recently approved for about a 211,000 square foot warehouse. That's the certificate of zoning compliance has recently been issued for that warehouse. It's just pending this easement vacation. So again, there was an amendment that was done, and the amendment was to allow this warehouse in a commercial zone district. When we were reviewing the certificate of zoning compliance, we realized that there was a 5-foot wide public easement, which you can, and here's a picture just for your kind of an FYI, this is what we've come up with. So here's the site plan. These are the elevations that were approved with the certificate of zoning compliance. While I was reviewing this, it was discovered that this easement here existed. This easement, again, was a utility maintenance easement. This easement was platted early on with the Gemstone Center, and it was carried over with the Cincy Commons plat. This easement is no longer necessary. The applicant was able to give letters from all of the different interested parties saying that they had no issues with this easement being vacated. And with that, as long as this easement is vacated, I can release the building permit to the applicant. And I'll entertain any questions if you have any at this time, Council.
Thank you, Alan. Council, any questions for Alan? Okay. Is the applicant with us this evening?
Yes, Ms. Mayor, she is online.
Okay. Kristen, if you're there, if you'd like to state your name and address for the record, if you have any comments, the time is yours for 10, 15 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm Kristen McNeil with the Land Group at 462 East Shore Drive in Eagle 83616. And, as Alan mentioned, this is a pretty simple, straightforward application. He covered everything very well. I don't really have much to add. Staff is recommending approval and we are in agreement. And with that, we respectfully ask for council's approval tonight, and I will stand for questions if there are any.
Thank you. Council, any questions for the applicant? Okay, see none. Mr. Clerk, do we have anyone sign up to testify on this item?
Mr. Mayor, we did not.
Okay, if there's anyone in the audience who'd like to provide testimony on this item, if you'd like to come forward at this time, or if there's anybody online who'd like to provide testimony, please use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the Zoom platform. Seeing nobody taking either option, Kristen, would you like to make any final comments?
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, then with that, council, what's your pleasure?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Borton.
Mr. Mayor, I move we close the public hearing on item H 2021-0011.
Second.
second.
I have a motion and a second to close the public hearing. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Borton.
Alan's presentation made this one relatively straightforward and easy. I would move that we approve the vacation H 2021-0011.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burnt.
I was waiting for someone else to second, but I'll go ahead and do it.
I've got a motion and a second to approve H 2021-0011. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
it's very hard to hear Councilmember Borton, so just for the remainder tonight, if you could speak into the mic, I think that's probably why you didn't hear any seconds from the remote, is we couldn't hear, but I appreciate the clarification. There was a motion for approval.
Will do.
If not, nothing further. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Borton.
Aye.
Cavanagh.
Aye.
Burrow.
Aye.
Hoagland.
Aye.
Burnt.
Aye.
All ayes, motion carries, and the item is agreed to. Have a good night, Alan. Thank you, Kristen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council.
Next item on the agenda is a public hearing for Foxcroft subdivision, H 2020-0113. We'll open this public hearing with staff comments and turn it over to Joe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Mine will not be as quick, unfortunately, but we'll get through it. As noted, this is for Foxcroft subdivision. The project consists of multiple properties totaling 35.7 acres of land, currently zoned RUT, with 12.74 acres of it currently zoned R15 as seen in the center map. The site is located directly west of 10 Mile Road and is on both sides of the proposed Pine Avenue extension. It is entirely east of the 10 Mile Creek. It surrounds the recently approved 10 Mile or Mile High Pine subdivision, which is this little pocket in the southeast. To the north is R4 and R8 zoning, detached single family and civic uses noted as the Fuller Park and the Chaparral Elementary School. To the east is 10 Mile Road with CC and some RUT zoning further to the east because the zoning for Mile High Pines has not been approved yet, or I should say has not taken place at the county yet. To the south is railroad property. South of this is CG with self-storage. To the west is R8 zoning and detached single family through across multiple different subdivisions. The only history on this site is for the R15 portion, which was the Ellensburg subdivision. It was annexed and zoned and platted, or had an approved preliminary plat and a CUP in 2005. The CUP and plat have expired, but the zoning ordinance was approved. So the zoning stuck, but nothing else. No DA, no plat, no site plan, nothing else has come through with that. The site does contain 2 future land use designations, medium density residential and mixed use community. The requests before you tonight are for an annexation of 23 acres of land with a request for the R8 zoning district, a preliminary plat consisting of 85 building lots and 31 common lots on 35.7 acres in the proposed R8 and the existing R15 zoning district. And a request for a conditional use permit for a multifamily development consisting of a total of 216 residential units on 12.74 acres of land in the existing R15 zone. Total unit count between both areas of the project is 291 units, 75 single-family units and 216 apartment units. The proposed uses are multifamily, residential, and single-family as noted. The single-family is broken out into detached single-family, attached single-family in the form of duplexes, and alley-loaded single-family. The project is proposed with a gross density of 8.17 dwelling units per acre, which is rounded down to 8 units per acre per the comp plan. This does fall at the maximum density allowed within the medium density residential designation. The majority of the subject property contains the medium density residential designation, but there is an area on the southwest portion of the project that contains the mixed use community designation. Mile High Pines, which was approved earlier this year, to the south and east of this project, it contains the mixed use community elements by having commercial along 10 Mile and the remaining of the site being multifamily. In addition, the existing commercial to the east should be taken into account for the overall area of the mixed-use community designation. The applicant has the opportunity to float designations, I should say comp plan designations, and propose a project that may fit with both or only one of them. In this case, the applicant has not chosen to include any commercial uses with the subject property and instead has proposed a project that is entirely residential, which corresponds with the medium density residential designation. Despite intentionally not proposing a project consistent with the MUC designation, the applicant does understand that integration of uses and incorporating adequate transitions between the uses is still important. Thus, this applicant and that of the project to the east, Mile High Pines, have worked together to allow cross-access between the projects on the south side of Pine Avenue extension, so both vehicles and pedestrians of this project can have easier access to the commercial area that is approved along 10 Mile. This access will be right here. With the latest information that has been provided to staff and the change in the conditions of approval and recommended DA provisions from the commission hearing, staff finds that the proposed project complies with the comp plan. The applicant submitted conceptual renderings for the proposed apartments and some photo examples of the proposed single-family homes. The submitted multifamily elevations show traditional walk-up garden-style apartments. The buildings appear to have at least 3 field materials of stucco, lap siding, and stone, and incorporate adequate roof plane variations. The buildings appear to share an identical color palette, which does not meet the architectural standards manual. Multifamily and attached single-family homes require design review prior to obtaining approval for building permit. And at that point, staff will ensure compliance with the architectural standards manual. As shown on the master street map, the applicant is proposing to construct and extend Pine Avenue as a 36-foot wide collector street from 10 Mile Road to the 10 Mile Creek, and construct a vehicle bridge over the creek. Mile High Pines is also required to construct their portion of the south side of the Pine Avenue extension. Both projects are required to construct this public road with the first phase of development to help with community infrastructure. The multifamily portion of the site is proposed with 2 driveway access points to Pine. We'll go back to this one. Those 2 access points are here and here. ACHD has approved these access points despite that the eastern driveway, the one closest to 10 Mile, does not meet their offset requirements and needs a 25% modification of policy to be approved. Moving this access further west would significantly change how the triangle-shaped R15 piece could develop, which aided in ACHD's determination to allow this access as proposed. All of the streets within the single-family portion of the site are proposed as public local streets at widths of 33 feet wide, which allow on-street parking where no driveways exist. There is a short segment of roadway in the south area of the site that contains a minor urban local street that serves 5 of the alley-loaded homes along Pine. That street is this street here. And for reference, all of these homes are alley-loaded homes. This is the minor urban local street. This road section is a reduced street section with a 24-foot width and does not require sidewalks. In addition, there are plenty of sidewalks adjacent to this area, mostly in front of the homes and also along the other local streets. So there will be adequate pedestrian access for these units. The revised plat shows 75 single-family building lots and 9 multifamily building lots with 41 common lots, totaling 125 lots. Of the 75 single-family lots, 3 are proposed to contain homes that are to remain. Those are obviously the largest lots noted on the plat. And they will be part of the new subdivision. There's 2 in the south and 1 in the northwest. The applicant proposes to construct the project in 3 phases, starting with the south segment, then moving north to the southwest, and then ending with the multifamily development. All proposed building lots appear to meet UDC dimensional standards on the revised preliminary plat. The cul-de-sac in the south area of the site is approximately 720 feet in length and connects to an emergency access within the Mile High Pines project. So right here. This cul-de-sac length requires city council approval because it exceeds code maximums. The single-family homes are required to show compliance with the parking standards at the time of individual lot development. But as noted, the local streets are also wide enough to allow on-street parking. Based on the number of bedrooms, the minimum parking required for the multifamily development is 411 spaces. The revised site plan shows 440 spaces, exceeding code requirements by 29 and amounting to slightly over 2 spaces per unit, which is an industry standard. Staff believes the revised site plan with additional parking spaces provides adequate parking without producing a waste of land area. A minimum of 10% qualified open space meeting UDC standards is required to meet UDC standards. And the multifamily development is required to provide common and private open space in line with the multifamily specific use standards. Combined, the required amount of minimum qualifying open space that should be provided is 4.81 acres. The applicant's revised open space exhibit shows a total of 7.33 acres of qualifying open space. The applicant is proposing 5.7 acres of open space to meet the minimum 10%, which amounts to approximately 16%. The qualified open space consists of the required street buffers, mostly along Pine, and a little segment along 10 Mile, the 10 Mile Creek area, and other open space areas throughout the site that meet the minimum dimensional standards. This area exceeds the minimum UDC requirements. The remaining 1.6 acres meet the common open space requirements for the multifamily development specific use standards and consist of a clubhouse pool with some, that does not make sense, clubhouse pool, and as well as other open space areas. The applicant is proposing 5 qualifying site amenities, which include the clubhouse and the pool, the fitness facilities, pedestrian bicycle paths, and open space that is at least 5,000 square feet. The commission recommended that an additional amenity be provided within the multifamily area. The applicant has discussed that with staff and has noted that it will likely be a tot lot. That location has not been determined as of our last conversations, but I'll leave that to the applicant to give you more details on that. A 10-foot wide multi-use pathway is required and proposed along the property's western, northern, and southern boundaries per the master pathways plan. The submitted plans show compliance with the master plan. Staff originally required that all pathways were to be constructed with the first phase of development, but with the Pine Avenue extension and the required detached sidewalks along its entire length, plus the first phase of pathway segment, which would be the south and the west boundary, staff now finds that the pathways would be better constructed with each phase. Overall, this applicant is proposing to construct approximately 4,500 linear feet, approximately 0.85 miles of pathway within this development, which does not include the detached sidewalks along Pine. This is an abnormally high number for one project to construct, so staff is appreciative of the proposed pathways. The new pathways constructed in this development would offer multiple avenues for residents in the vicinity to safely get to Fuller Park and Chaparral Elementary. Staff is in full support of the proposed pathway plan for the subject development. Both staff and commission recommended approval of the subject applications. At the hearing, there were a few members of the, there was only one member of the public that spoke against the project. There were some discussions, I should say the issues that were brought up were regarding the future land use map and its correlation to density, concern over the extension of Pine Avenue, and the potential of traffic increasing at the intersection of Pine at Black Cat, which is approximately half a mile to the west. Density of the project not being compatible with subdivisions to the west and larger lots even further west of Black Cat. And there was some discussions about the Black Cat and Pine intersection being signalized, which is not required because it was an offsite improvement. ACHD discussed that within their staff report, that there should not be enough of this traffic heading that direction to warrant those offsite improvements. Commission discussed this traffic concern as well as how the southernmost lots will function. They discussed the redevelopment plan for the 3 existing homes, specifically the 2 lots in the southern section. And they discussed the general location of the different types of single-family homes and how they will access them. As noted, they also discussed what additional amenity would be appropriate in the multifamily development. The commission recommended approval with modification in line with the memo that I sent the week of the commission hearing. I made all those changes, and they only added one, which was to add an additional amenity within the multifamily area. There has been no written testimony since the commission hearing. So after that, I will stand for any questions.
Thank you, Joe. Council, any questions for staff? Councilman Borton.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. Quick question, Joe, just to clarify. The multifamily portion of this project, that triangle, that's on the existing already annexed parcel. So it's got zoning already, and it's just the CUP for that parcel, that portion of this application. Is that right?
Councilman Bourne, that is correct, yes.
And the remainder of the application is a zoning with the annexation as well.
Correct. But we are also, the DA does include all of the project. Yes.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Borton.
one question to you, Joe, on the designation, kind of as a heads up to the applicant that they can address it, but the mixed use community designation in your staff report identifies the ability to float, and you referenced transition, or excuse me, you said the adequate transition between uses is still important. And my question was, in the mixed use community, when it talks about adequate transition between uses, it seemed as though uses would be commercial versus residential versus civic, and that those are different uses. But here it looks like the transition between uses is different types of residential. Is that what the word uses is intended to mean when you're looking at mixed use community? Or is it really intended to mean residential versus commercial versus office or civic, truly distinct uses?
Councilman Bourne, great question. Traditionally, it is more of those distinct uses is what we want to have better transitions between. However, there should be, I guess, not just transition of uses, but transitional densities would be more appropriate for the residential uses, the different residential uses. But the main point was transitioning from the commercial and then the multifamily of Mile High Pines, and then to these single family residential, which then is a transitional density to the existing single family residential further to the west.
Real quick ones,
That's
just
important.
to clarify. In that project directly to the east, the majority of that is residential as well. Just the portion along 10 Mile is commercial.
That is correct.
Okay. Last question, if I could, the 2 gray boxes on the, or brown boxes, I think they're existing sites. I tried to read small print and I can't make out. Those are existing sites that are going to stay. Is that right?
Councilman Bourne, that is correct. That's why I put this picture in here, just so you could see this home is going to stay as well as these 2. This area will be removed, and I believe a couple of these little outbuildings as well.
One last question was, and this is a heads up for the applicant, is when those homes are ultimately do get removed, do they come back and replat those parcels to add future home sites to it?
Councilman Borden, another great question. Yes, we asked that the applicant provide a redevelopment plan, which is part of the plat conditions, but not the DA. We found that it wasn't we didn't want them to have to do a DA mod in order to plat them. So, but yes, they would have, if they want to subdivide further those 2 lots, then yes, they'd have to come back and do another plat, which would come to council.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
thank you. Joe, do I remember correctly when we heard the Mile High application that there is an emergency access off of the cul-de-sac for fire and police?
Councilwoman Pro, that is correct. I tried to note that in my report or my presentation, but it's right at the end of this, and it basically follows this angle. It goes right down one of the, not common drives, but one of the alleys for the townhome units.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Joe, in your staff report, it talks about, the vast majority of kind of this project is falls into the MDR for future land use plan. And when we're looking at it, we've got a gross density of, a skosh over 8 dwelling units per acre, and the MDR calls for 3 to 8. I recognize you've rounded down. How frequently are we doing that, rounding down when I kind of look at that number as 3 to 8. Anything over 8 doesn't necessarily fall under the MDR, and I'm just curious how often we're rounding those numbers down.
Councilman Cavanagh, I can't give you a percentage or anything like that. It usually doesn't happen. From my experience, we're usually within the range, or if anything, I probably had more experience with rounding up.
Yeah.
But it does occur. I mean, the comp plan does allow for this. It does specifically state that if it's a 0.5%, then you would round down. If it's the top half, standard algebra 1, we're allowed to do that through the comprehensive plan.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Joe, I was a social science major, so that's probably where some of my questions are coming from. I appreciate the clarification on that. My other question was about the amenities, and as I understand from kind of your report and the staff report, with the exception of the open space, the vast majority of the amenities are going to be constructed within phase 3.
Councilman Cavanagh, yes and no. So the overall site only requires 1 amenity for the single family portion because of its size per code. However, they are proposing a tot lot in the south, as well as, I believe, a picnic area here in the north, and additional open space.
Okay.
That would technically qualify as an amenity. But the 5 additional amenities are going to be with the multifamily development, yes. It shouldn't be taken lightly that the pathways in themselves are an amenity, as well as adding multiple connections, or I should say ways to get to Fuller Park. So,
Agreed. Great. Thanks for that clarification. I must have missed the piece about the tot lot. Thanks, Joe.
no worries.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
2 questions for Joe, both related to streets. The cul-de-sac in the south, it exceeds our length, the one with the emergency access, but I think the length does it have to do with the speed of cars, in that if we have some bends and turns, it's a little more acceptable than just a one straight long shot? Can you jog my memory on that?
Councilman Hogan, that is my understanding. Same thing with our block length requirements, is that it's meant to not have a racetrack down. So that does help, but there is the overall length requirement as well, which is probably a fire thing more than a planning thing.
Okay.
But with the cul-de-sac and the emergency access, that is hopefully mitigated mostly.
And to my second question, I noticed we have a crossing over Pine where the pathway is, but where we have the 2 streets coming together, where you just indicated, well, this side has the tot lot, that side has the picnic benches. Are there going to be crosswalks at that intersection right there where your pointer is? Or are we going to have any pedestrian type of light? What's the plan for that area?
Councilman Hogan, I do not know that there are any plans to have a pedestrian light or any kind of crossing there, because it's going to be local streets connecting to a collector. Collector should, especially this kind of collector, it should only be a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit. It shouldn't be the 40 or up, which is good. Again, that's an ACHE thing more than it is us.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
And we do have Christy here with us if we need to get into that. Council, any further questions for staff? Okay. And I'll ask the applicant to please come forward and say your name and address and be recognized for 15 minutes.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jane Suggs, Gem State Planning. I'm at 9839 Cable Car Street in Boise. And I'm going to request if I can take this off for a few minutes because my glasses fog up. Thank you very much. A little clearer as well. Again, Jane Suggs, no relation. You know, one time there's another Suggs around. So I'm here representing Foxcroft Subdivision, and also Deb Nelson is in the audience with Givens Persley, and she's on our team attending tonight. We really appreciate working with the staff. If you've read through the staff report, you see that we've worked out all of our issues with our updated plans, especially with Joe and Bill Parsons, Bruce Freckleton, Joe Bongiorno. I'm going to mess up his name. So let's first take a look at that site plan again. We're just really happy to report that P&Z recommended approval, and we agree with all the conditions of approval in the staff report. You'll find those in your package. And we agree to put the tot lot in the multifamily, and we are actually thinking that that tot lot will probably go up here in the recreation area because there's plenty of room there for a tot lot. And I will talk a little bit more about the fact that we have these intimate recreation areas in this development, but we are next to a large, very large park. Just wanted to let you know that Foxcroft is an infill community and it is approvable as condition. So we could stop right there and I could answer a bunch of questions, but let me tell you a little bit more about it. This is a bridge. This is not the one over 10 Mile Creek, but there'll be something similar. Keep in mind as we walk through this process that this developer, Trilogy, will be building a bridge over 10 Mile Creek. And that will actually construct a great connection on Pine Avenue so that you can now drive from Black Cat to 10 Mile. That is a much needed piece of infrastructure for the entire community. With our approval tonight, we would start our design and our approval process. That usually takes 6 to 8 months. That would take us almost to the end of the year just to get our bridge designed and approved by all the agencies, Nampa Meridian, City of Boise, ACHD, Corps of Engineers. We do want to get the bridge built before March 15th of next year. So we are a little bit in a time crunch here. Also, by building this bridge, we actually improve safety for all the residents along Pine Avenue because now we have a great connection. In fact, we'll probably find a lot of folks that are on the other side of 10 Mile Creek will be using this connection to get to 10 Mile because that's how you get to the freeway very easily. Show you one more. One of the agreed upon conditions that, as Joe pointed out, that you don't really see in phase developments, you usually see some improvements along streets with each phase. We have agreed to put in all the improvements along with Mile High Pines, to put all the improvements, curb, gutter, sidewalk on Pine Avenue in the first phase. And we're agreeing to build the bridge in the first phase. So if we start here in this lower area, and we will be building these, and we'll be building all the improvements. So you'll actually be able to get out to 10 Mile from the very beginning. I also want to put this project in a little bit of context, of course, with the surrounding areas, and Joe did a good job of looking at that. Quite a bit of activity down along the 10 Mile interchange area. You'll recall, of course, that Mile High Pines development included 28,000 plus square feet of commercial uses. So this is a really good opportunity for the Foxcroft community to support those commercial uses and also have pedestrian access to those commercial uses. We think that Foxcroft, or I believe it shows that it's a great transition between the commercial areas that are down here in this lower area. Let's see if I can find my cursor there. And a good transition. We're next to Fuller Park without having to cross the street, and Chaparral Elementary without having to cross a street. So great transition there. And also transitioning to the residential pieces that are to the west. Again, since we're close to a park and a school, you want houses. You want a lot of houses. It's a really good opportunity to utilize the infrastructure that's already there. And as of course you can see here, we're almost completely surrounded by city. As mentioned previously, the apartments are already annexed and zoned for higher density residential. They are 15. The apartments will have a 3,000 square foot clubhouse. It has a community room, a fitness room, a kitchenette, plus a swimming pool, and we're adding the play structure. Here are some renderings, and I think you've seen some of these. Again, we talked a little bit about all the different types of housing that are being provided. We have the larger lots, and you can see those. Mr. Borton already pointed those out. They were brown on the other one, but here and here. They will be part of the plat, and I can show you in a few minutes the redevelopment plan for that. I just want to run through these first. Let's see. Peach colored lots, these are the ones that are front loaded here. They're going to make a great streetscape along Pine Avenue, and they are accessed in the back, garages in the back. So that'll be a nice streetscape along there. Of course, as a collector, you don't want to have driveways. Here's an example of one of the alley loaded. You can see they're really cute little houses with a little landscaping up front. We have to actually, because of the streets in the back, we put a nice big landscaped area in the front. The yellow lots are 2-unit townhomes, and they provide a nice transition from the apartments over to the single family. So we've taken upon ourselves to, this is a pretty new design here. This actually will be built could be built as a duplex or could be built as a duet, which I call a duet is with a property boundary in between. And then finally, we have the standard single family lots that are here and running down here. Foxcroft really has, and that's just an example of a front load home. You've seen lots of those. We really have great diversity of housing for such a small project. We do have the amenities. We have the gazebo area here. Again, these are some of the more intimate sort of little neighborhood pockets. We are next to the large park. And then we have the amenities that will be here in the multifamily. We have the tot lot down here. And as mentioned, we have a lot of pathways. Just to let you know, Fuller Park, again, right across this is the 10-mile stub drain, but didn't mean to do that. It's 23 acres. It has picnic shelters, restrooms, playgrounds, baseball fields, volleyball fields, and a pond. I'm sure you've been out there. It's an incredible park. And we think that that's a great recreation amenity for all the residents here. But again, we wanted to show some of those more intimate kind of places where people could gather. That really touched one of the planning and zoning commissioners. He says, the apartment guys need some intimate locations too. And that's how we added the tot lot. Let's take a look at some of those again. Oh. Okay. There's a gazebo / pergola, and that's the location here in the upper area here. I'm not handling this very well. And then here's a tot lot, and there will be 2 of these, one in the south portion and one in the multifamily. More slide or 2, and I'll answer some questions. Again, there's my connectivity slide, one you've already seen, I think. Okay. Lots of pathways. I'm sorry about that. I'm not getting the right response from my keyboard here. Lots of pathways. Some of those are regional pathways. This north pathway, you might remember this one right here that runs along the 10-mile stub drain actually is on top of a sewer that was installed by the city as a trunk line, and it was land that was an easement that was dedicated by the developer so that they could get that in a few years ago. So that was part of kind of agreement. And somewhere in your package, there's even a thank you letter from the sewer department for doing that. That was really nice of the staff to do that. Again, we have these regional pathways. This one over here is, right here is already in place. So we're continuing it down to here. Then we run out of opportunity because we don't own the land. So we're going to use that and cross over and a little right here, and then come down here on this side. And this is the railroad track down here. So this is part of a regional pathway that the city has planned as well along the railroad track. Lots of internal sidewalks and pathways too. Of course, we want to make it easy for people to get to each other's neighborhoods. We want to get over to the commercial areas, and we want to be able to get to the park and the school. I will answer a few more questions that have already come up, but would respectfully request your approval of our applications for annexation, zone, preliminary plat, and the CUP for the Foxcroft Apartments. Let's see if I can go ahead and answer those if there's some time.
Okay. Council, any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Perone.
Thank you, Mrs. Shuggs. Question, I would like to follow up on a question that Councilman Hoagland presented earlier, which is pedestrian access across Pine. I have lived in the subdivision directly to the west of this for 12 years, intimately familiar with this area, and have spent numerous hours in Fuller Park. But I'm still trying to figure out how pedestrians, especially on the south side, would access that. Is it going to be a sidewalk across the bridge on Pine? Is that how they're primarily going to get to the north side?
There'll be sidewalks on both sides of Pine Street. We had talked a little bit internally, and I think even with the staff, about this pathway that runs along the canal and connecting the two. We could do a crosswalk. I think some of those things would be something that we would monitor as development occurred. I don't know that we would specify that now, and that's something we would work with ACHD. So when that connection actually occurs, we can see if the traffic needs certainly a crosswalk is one thing. Any other type of flashing lights or hawk signal probably needs to come after we do some analysis to determine if that's is necessary with a number of people crossing. But so this is a pathway that runs along the 10-mile canal and will cross over Pine Street. And of course, sidewalks all up and down Pine Street. Does that answer the question a little bit?
Well, so if pedestrians were to need to stay on the south side of Pine, they would basically need to go all the way over to an entrance, the most eastern entrance in Castlebrook, head through Castlebrook's Park, and then get into Fuller Park on the west side, and then have to make a right and head back in. There's just not a direct way to Fuller Park without that pedestrian access across the bridge. I mean, it would be a significant roundabout way to get into the park, going through potentially two other subdivisions, unless I'm missing something.
I'm not following you very well. Okay, I can't touch this because it's too sensitive. I'm sorry. Get us back to the landscape plan, or maybe a plan that shows the surrounding area. I apologize. There we go. That's good. So there is a pathway. I'm going to try this again. We'll be constructing a pathway here along the creek. So if you lived in the south area, you could come down here, you could get either on the sidewalk along Pine, and then you would cross over. There is a pathway here. If you want to get a little closer, there is there is a crossing. Okay, I need some batteries or something. Okay, there is a crossing off of our property that goes over the stub drain. I don't think it's very well used, but we are taking our pathway to that location as far as we can on our property. We cannot put a path over the stub drain. We've been told by Nampa Meridian that we can't do that. So I guess I'm not following you, Ms. Burrow, about where you think we're going to have to cross down Pine Street to get to the park. I mean, there is a pathway that runs. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Where are the residents going to cross Pine to get to the park?
Well, there's a place right here. There are sidewalks here. They could come up through this sidewalk. There's a pathway here and takes you to this location. And again, this is the location that takes you over the stub drain, but we cannot build that. Otherwise, you would walk down Pine Street to go on the pathway that's behind, okay, here. And this takes you down your right. It takes you a little bit further this way and takes you over to the park. There's a pathway there. Does that answer your question? This pathway here, and then there's a place to cross the stub drain down here.
Not exactly, but so the question that Councilman Hoagland presented earlier was, if Pine is going to be a collector, there are some safety factors to cross at the intersections of the streets within the neighborhood. So if there are not going to be crosswalks required, then how do a resident safely cross Pine to get to the amenities?
And my response is, we can put crosswalks at every intersection. We don't typically see every local street tying into a collector with a crosswalk. We can put those in. I think what we were thinking about, or at least what I immediately went to, was a more robust crossing opportunity, but we don't want to go and signify or put in some sort of signal for crossing on a collector, because that's where you move traffic, unless we see that there is a necessity for that, and that would come later. So that is why I'm saying, yeah, crosswalks are just paints on the ground, and it signifies where people can cross, and you see those all over town, but I don't know that we would put anything more than that. So we could put them on the bridge, or just beyond the bridge where the crossing is on the west side of the bridge, or we can put them where the streets, all the local streets tie in. Just, I'm not thinking that we need to put anything more until we know that we need something more.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
And maybe we could either ask Christy or Garrett to chime in. I think, council, this is one of those questions where it's not uncommon. I mean, we can talk, their pathways cross arterial roadways with no identified crossing. And sometimes when they cross roadways, they have hawk signals or blinking lights put in. There's really no consistent behavior that we have in the city, or expectation, quite frankly, of pathways. Now, maybe it's a pathway to a park, but it's still, we have a railroad track, which actually limits even further where people are going to come from. But from a very practical standpoint, every intersection, whether with a crosswalk or not, has the same basic treatment in terms of, establishing the right of pedestrians to cross. But maybe Christy could chime in to see if there's an ACHD standard as it relates to lighting a crosswalk or pathway along an arterial or collector.
Mr. Mayor, this is Christy Anselman with ACHD. Yes, thank you. I think you and Jane have answered that very well. We typically do not go in on, especially a new development like this, and put enhanced crossings in before we really know that there's a need for it. All of those crossings where the street crosses the sidewalk, there'll be ADA ramps that will direct people and they can get across the roadway. But until we know that there's a high traffic area, or we know there's going to be a lot of pedestrian use, that's not something we typically require a developer or go in and put in before we know that there's really a need for that type of signalized or higher use type of crossing. I hope that helps.
It answers the question. I may not answer council's desire if they would like one or not, but it at least answers the question, I believe.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
yeah, since I raised the issue, I was just curious. I recognize the fact that there's not going to be a huge influx of young people headed north down this pathway because of the railroad tracks and other constraints. But there are going to be kids and adults who want to access that park and who will be going to school. So I was hoping there at least be some sort of markings. And again, it doesn't have to be the hawk signal right away, but there would be an identified crosswalk area, whether it's the bridge or the intersection, for them to at least it's identified, they can cross safely and not, because unfortunately the timing of going to school and rush hour kind of coincides. So get people used to the idea that there's a crosswalk there and you're going to have kids there. I do want to follow up though, because I was surprised to learn that they're not going to be able to access the park where we see that pathway. And you mentioned, you can't build over the stub drain to the park, but is that something the irrigation district can do?
If the irrigation wants that to go, yes. We talked to the irrigation district actually about an alternative location for a crossing and they said no. So this is one of those things where I'm hoping that the pathway coordinator might want to spend some time with Nampa Meridian, because you already have a master pathway plan with Nampa Meridian Irrigation District. And we are putting a pathway along the 10-mile stub drain just outside of their easement. But once you get beyond that, we have not been able to convince them that there is a path. It's just right now has a chain across it and they use it for maintenance. Kids use it all the time. So it's one of those, it's kind of an unofficial, but not. So I think that's one of those things where we might get the pathways people to kind of work together. Again, it's off of our property, so we're not really able to do that because the stub drain is sort of off of, in that location, off of our property. So we have looked at it. And Ms. Perot is right. If you cross over to the west side of the 10 Mile Creek, there is a regular crossing that goes over to the park, but then you double back to go to the school.
As this, at least from an outside perspective, I mean, I understand, but I would hope that if there's ever a potential, I don't know what the cost to put in the conduit and everything else. I hate seeing ACHD have to go in and invest a lot of money to them, like Councilman Kavner, the one that was outside of your neighborhood, and that area is basically 3 months to put in a flashing light with all the work that they had to do to dig underground.
Yeah.
So it would be great if this is a direction that people want to go. It's done during construction of the road as compared to coming back 6 months later when you see what the use is. But that's just a.
Mr. Mayor.
Council, any further questions for the applicant?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavner.
I guess sticking with the pathway theme, Jane, if you could pull back up, you had a great illustration that kind of showed all of your connectivity that you're planning to put in. And where I'm trying to track, maybe less so to the park, more so to the school, how residents in either phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 would plan to get from their residence to the school.
Okay, right now, they would come down the 10 mile.
And if there's another illustration you'd rather use, Jane, I know that
I'm having a hard time using the mouse, so it's not reacting to me very well. Okay, so there's a pathway along the south side of the 10 mile stub drain here, and we show it coming here, and that's where there is a location where you can cross over to the park. There is no location right now to go over to the school. We inquired upon a location that was closer to this, but we were told no by the Nampa Meridian Irrigation District. so that we could not put any type of crossing there. So kids that are in the apartments will probably actually come down to 10 Mile, just walk up a short part of 10 Mile and go into the subdivision. There's a crossing through the subdivision called Mosher's Farm, and you can go through there and get to the school that way. And we did inquire upon that, getting a pathway to go into Mosher's, but then we didn't also talk to Mosher's because that would mean a bunch of kids going through their subdivision. I mean,
Yeah.
if you look at an aerial photograph, you'll see that it looks like all the pathways are supposed to be on the Mosher's Farm side because they have this open space with pathways in it. Oh, there you go. Look at that.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Joe.
Thank you. To further on that and to answer Councilman Kavanaugh's question, preliminary discussions about this also, you can kind of see the property line here. This would be Fuller Park to the west of that line, and then the elementary school here. We were told that both the school and police did not want an additional connection point to the school because it's one more point for somebody to have to check and look and watch out for. And so they wanted to maintain only the one that was here through Mosher Farm. So it was anticipated that with the additional sidewalk along Pine, as Jane noted, that they would just come out to 10 Mile and then be able to use the existing access point.
Mr. Mayor, follow up.
Councilman Kavanaugh.
So Jane, is that the sidewalks regardless will go in with phase one? It's the added pathways that would be, as I understand correctly from Joe's report, would be kind of phase dependent.
Yes, the pathways in phase one would go and the sidewalk along Pine would go, but the rest of the pathways and sidewalks would be phase dependent. And a lot of that is just because to have people walking on those pathways while you're trying to construct a subdivision is going to be kind of difficult. So we would do those when we were constructing the subdivision. It's just not going to be possible to get all of that construction in when you have people walking through your construction site. We would actually have to close it probably if we build it, and then we'd have to repair it. So not with that. So we talked to the staff about that, and they said, yeah, that makes sense, especially if you're going to go ahead and put all of your improvements on Pine, so which is a big deal, and build the bridge. So something just popped in my mind. If you drive down to the end of Pine on the west side of the street's not quite finished, and neither is the sidewalk. So there must be some bond money, and I don't know if Christie's got this, for the completion of the street on the other side that's off-site. It's not in the easement of the creek. So we'll be working on the creek, but we won't be working down Pine on the other side of the creek. So we will of course work through all of that with construction drawings, because that's why we want to get going on our construction drawings so we can deal with all of those issues. Can I respond to Mr. Borton and his question about redevelopment of those properties? In my PowerPoint, I have it at the end. Keep going. There we go. So we were asked by the staff, they wanted to know what this would look like. So we did that. We think that's a great example of what could happen. And it does not create any problems for the adjacent properties. It actually provides the secondary access down here. Well, you can't see that, but I'm pointing to the secondary access. And it keeps the two existing homes. Let's say that they want to keep those nice homes. So we thought that was a great opportunity to show a little bit about how that could redevelop. We can go back up to the landscape plan. There you go. There was a question, I think, about the cul-de-sac length, and we would request your approval of that length so that we could provide that emergency access over to Mile High Pines. We think with the open space, the driveway there towards the end, the pathway that we have that's connecting, that would slow people down, and they really don't have any place to go. So, but it does provide that great emergency access to Mile High Pines. Again, one of the things we think is just so important about this project is the ability to build that bridge and get this started, getting Pine Avenue built. It is a great connection for the entire community there. We did hear from one of the neighbors who's actually on the other side of Black Cat, and she talked about all the traffic coming from the west side of 10 Mile Creek. So everybody goes out to Black Cat. They turn down south to go down. There's a school there, which causes problems, but that's how you get to the freeway. You have to go south. And so now this will be a great opportunity. You know, I think we can lessen some of the issues there by having a connection to 10 Mile. Again, I very respectfully request your approval of our annexation, our rezone, our preliminary plat, and our CUP. And I'll stand for some more questions if there were, and it's something I missed.
Council, any
Mr.
further
Mayor.
questions for the applicant? Councilman Pro.
I'd like to just clarify the reason that I am bringing this up and so strongly encouraging conversation about this is because, again, I've lived here for 12 years. I've driven around Black Cat and would have loved to have had a way from Pine to 10 Mile. For all these years, I've driven around the block and gone to Franklin and gone to Cherry to get around to where we need to be. But my Pine, even though Pine is only a half mile currently, there's about 450 houses that access Pine to get to Black Cat. And there's another development coming in Horse Meadows. And so Pine, even though it stops at dead ends, it's busy and it's very busy. And so addressing my fellow council members, we've had lots of conversations about different neighborhoods in our city where there are safety issues, pedestrian safety issues that we've later had to come back and have conversations about in Tuscany, in Woodbridge, in various areas of the city. And I don't want this to become one of those where we're where we're down the road 5 and 10 years and we're talking about, you know, something that's simple that could have been done. In my opinion, striping a crosswalk is sufficient in this area for now, but I have no doubt that Pine is going to become busy and become a thoroughfare, and it should be if it's a collector. That's the intention of it. So I'm not, you know, saying that shouldn't become a busy area, but if being a resident in that location, I'm not going to use 10 Mile to head south because 10 Mile's backed up to Cherry Lane frequently. It's backed up to Pine, it's backed up to Cherry Lane multiple times a day. So if I'm in any of that area, I'm in Chesterfield, I'm in Castlebrook, I'm in the subdivision that's between the two, I'm still heading out to Black Cat because you can't get down 10 Mile. A light at Pine or no light at Pine, I'm not using that because literally there's going to be people leaving the apartment complex and heading out east to the light and getting stuck there because they're not even going to be able to make a right onto 10 Mile numerous times a day. So I understand where you're coming from. Like it would be ideal for all these subdivisions to now be able to access onto 10 Mile and get down to the freeway faster. At this point in time, it's not going to happen because there's just too much traffic on 10 Mile. I've waited minutes and minutes and minutes to get onto 10 Mile in areas where there isn't a light that allows for a crossing. So I'm challenging you a little bit because I want to say, I don't think if you want to propose that Fuller Park and Chaparral are great community resources for this neighborhood, yes, except that there's not pedestrian access to them. So how can we say that they're you know, great amenities for your neighborhood when there isn't a way to get there? And so I'm still not feeling satisfied that question's been answered, or that there's a safety factor that's been answered either, especially if we're talking about children that are crossing over to Chaparral. The other thing I'm curious about is Chaparral's a year-round school. And as far as I know, West Ada still allows the parents to choose if the students go to Chaparral or if they go to Peregrine. So it's possible that some of these students may not choose to go to Chaparral at all. They may still choose to go to Peregrine because it's only a 9-month schedule. So is your understanding that that's still the case?
It was my understanding that West Ada had recently changed that, and all of these students will be going to Chaparral. They will not be going to Peregrine. That is the school of that district. So that's the recent information we got from the West Ada School District.
That is correct.
And I would agree. We take a condition that says we'll put striping I just don't want to go ahead and start thinking that we're going to have any kind of electronic signals all along Pine Street, just like any collector. But I understand that, and I understand the mayor's request that let's not have to tear up the road 3 months after we put it in because we need to put in some sort of conduit for some sort of hawk signal or something. Again, I'm doing everything I can to get folks to those regional pathways, and I will work however I need to with the parks and pathways folks to see if we can't off-site get the right connections to the school. But I understand what Joe said when the school says, well, if you put all these connections to the school, we have to monitor those. And so I've ran into that at various jurisdictions. The schools like to have the kids come in the front door and not so much in the back door because it just opens itself up to too much mayhem, I guess. Again, I appreciate your concern, Ms. Pro, because you do live in that area, and part of our conditions from our traffic study and from ACHD is that we will be looking at the improvements to the Pine and 10 Mile intersection. We actually will be looking at improvements that might have to happen on the east side of 10 Mile on Pine so that we can make sure that the lanes line up. That will all be determined by a new updated traffic study. But that will be a light there. So now we'll have pretty good opportunity, at least for people to make some of those turning movements that might right now be a little restricted, but that will be we will be working with ACHD on that.
Mr. Mayor, just two more quick questions, if I may.
Councilman Pro.
I believe there was a statement made about the entrance into the apartment area, multifamily area on the east, and that it is closer to the intersection than ACHD's code permits, although they allowed for, they allowed for this, they approved it. Is there any possible way that, is that going to be just a write-in, right out? And is there any possible way to design that such that that would be an entrance only and the farther west would be an exit only or something like that? So you're flowing the traffic through in one way and out the other so you don't have a lot of, left turns coming out of that so close to a major intersection?
That is a full intersection there. It was the only, across the street, it's the only access to Mile High Pines. So this is where we worked together with the Mile High Pines developer Barron to make sure that we were coordinating that. And that worked for both of us and was approved by ACHD. There was no request by ACHD or signified by our TIS that we make that right in, right out. Again, there's opportunity for that to be a full intersection, both of those, so that we don't have people having to drive through the driveways of the rest of the apartment complex to get there. Again, if that becomes an issue, again, we're kind of supposing there are issues, and if that becomes an issue, we can always make some adjustments to that. But right now, ACHD in our traffic study did not indicate any need for that to be a right in, right out. So I'm going to go with those decisions. Thank you.
Council, any further questions for the applicant?
Right now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, do we have people signed up to testify on this item?
Mr. Mayor, nobody signed up in advance.
Okay. Well, if there's anybody would like to provide public testimony on this item, if you'd like to come forward at this time, say your name and address for the record, or if you're online and use the raise your hand feature, and we can bring you in for any comments at this time. I'm not seeing anybody wish to provide testimony. Okay, would you like to make any final comments?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I was just advised by someone that's a lot more knowledgeable on some of these things than I am, that whereas we would agree that crosswalks may be necessary, we cannot put those in and agree to a condition unless ACHD agrees to that. So we would have to condition our condition that if ACHD agrees for crosswalks striping, we would put those in. So just want to make sure that I don't find myself with a condition I can't meet because another agency won't let me do that. So thank you. Again, answering any questions you might have. Again, we feel this is an infill type property that would be a great opportunity. And we are a little bit in a time crunch to get our design of our bridge and our improvements done so we can get this built this winter. So thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Burnt.
Mr. Mayor, I have a question for Christy. Christy, are you available?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Hi, Christy. Thank you for being available. Any concerns about a crosswalk at the bridge area, right? We've been discussing this evening.
Councilman, I don't have any concerns, but I am not a member of our traffic department.
Let's make a deal tonight, Christy. Let's make a deal.
Let's make a deal. Let's see what we can get done here. I would say that's something that you can certainly, I would probably agree with Ms. Suggs, that that's something that you could maybe amend the condition that upon approval of ACHD, I would want our traffic to just weigh in on that and say whether
something on
they're
the spot right now.
whether they're
agreement. She loves me.
right. I know I do. I've worked with Ms. Suggs before, but
Thank you, Christy. That's
I
good.
would just
appreciate
want them. I would just want them to weigh in before I said we were okay with it. ACHD was okay
I
with
heard
it.
what you said, Christy. I heard it.
Okay, sorry.
Oh, you're good. I appreciate you.
And Mr. Mayor, and comment to Christie and
Councilman
Jane, too.
Hoagland.
That crosswalk, if it's ACHD agrees, I mean, whether it's at the walking path or that intersection, just having some location somewhere that makes sense and works for everybody to have that identification.
Mr. Mayor, I completely agree.
Yeah. Condition with a condition. We like that.
With an asterisk of what Christy said.
Christy said.
Maybe just a little reminder.
What Christy said.
What Christy said goes. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think likely we would be amenable some type of a painted crossing, but I would want traffic to weigh in on its location.
And a conduit in case there's ever a future. We'll talk about that later. But
Yeah, that definitely would need to get approval from somebody other than myself.
Well, Mr. Mayor, to your point, I think
Councilman
it's worth
Hoagland.
exploring. Conduit's a lot cheaper than redoing the road. It's hard to tell. If it's a small line that has to go through, maybe. If it's going to be a lot more complicated than that, probably not. But that's something I'd like you to take a look at.
I've got some extra.
Joe's
blue-
taking notes right now for us because we'll be coming back with a final plat and construction drawings. And at some point, somebody will be looking at that. And Bruce or somebody's on the line right now, I bet.
Mr. Mayor, I had a question
Councilman Hoagland.
for staff. I know Garrett's on the line from Parks and not Kim, who coordinates our pathway system. But I want to give Garrett an opportunity to just speak to the pathway system. Garrett, is that something Kim can take a look at about having a bridge to that point where it makes sense and sounds like something's already there? And I think we've worked with the Nampa Meridian before on these types of things where something has existed and we work to make it happen. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Councilman Hoagland, I spoke with Kim about that exact spot right there today. And she had mentioned that a lot of times Nampa Meridian does not like those crossways where, but she's willing to work with them and see what she can do. Also, just to the west of that, there's already a connection bridge that I think Jane spoke of earlier. And Kim made the comment this morning that when that was put in, they actually didn't really agree to that as well and just kind of went with it. But yeah, absolutely, Kim can look into that. Not going to overpromise anything, but she can absolutely look into it and see what she can do.
Thank you, Garrett. Appreciate it. And Mr.
Yeah.
Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
another follow-up, this time for Deputy Chief Mongiorno. Chief, I wanted to get your input on the cul-de-sac and its length. And of course, it is emergency access. To me, they've got some bends in it to make it so it's not a speedway type thing, but are we good from your eyes for keeping that length and that access point?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and Councilman, we did look at it and I am 100% okay with it. They actually needed that emergency access at the end of that cul-de-sac to help with, because it's kind of an odd shaped piece of property, that access, the emergency access is helping both the previous project and their project. So it's good. We're okay with it. And Joe was corrected as a fire code issue, and I'm okay with it.
Great. Thank you, Chief.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
Garrett, are you still on?
Yes.
Can you go back to where you were pointing the footbridge that you were pointing to before? Okay, so that is that where there's a proposal that folks will cross to get into Fuller Park?
I believe so. If I'm understanding Jane correctly, she may be able to speak that, but I believe that is Jane's proposal.
So that's probably 3/4 to a mile from the south part of. We're talking about elementary school children. 3/4 of a mile to a mile from the south. It's a long way around, a significantly long way around. And so where you're pointing right there, there is no current connection.
That is the one that I'm going to have Kim look into to see if she can talk. Correct. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I know exactly where that is. And that would be much, much better connection. It's still a ways away, but it would be much better connection. Otherwise the students are going to go through, they're going to head west onto Pine, then they're going to go through the Castlebrook subdivision, and they're going to go up a private pathway that is a subdivision pathway that's not a public pathway. If you move your cursor over, there you go, keep going. So if they're heading west on Pine and they're heading up Carisbrook Avenue, that over to the west, and they take that private, that pathway is a private pathway that belongs to that subdivision. It is not public. So the proposal would be that folks from the various subdivisions are going through this neighborhood on a private pathway to get into Fuller Park.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Joe.
I would like to clarify that there's an existing 10-foot pathway on the west side of the creek, and that's the way that they would access the existing access there.
So far.
It actually doesn't go through, I don't think.
According to our master pathways plan, it does. It should. I hope it does. And then hopefully they're not using that to get to the school, and it'd be faster and easier to go along 10 Mile and then through this subdivision through their existing pathways.
So, Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Cavanagh.
Question for Jane. Oh, zoom back in. Whoever's in control, you're doing a great job, by the way. This blue line. So right in the top, right, just a little bit to the right. Yep. Nope, that's left, but right. Keep going. Right there. So is the creek open there? Is it tiled? I guess what I'm failing to see is why we don't just connect a pathway right there to Fuller. That takes you right into the park and right to the front entrance of the school. Help me, and maybe you've touched on this, Jane, and I just didn't pick up on it, why we can't do that.
I'd be happy to, Councilmember Kavner. There is a fence across the creek there that's gathered a bunch of debris. I would imagine kids sometimes use that. However, the fence continues all the way north, separating the park from the school. So when you do go along the pathways, you actually have to go north to get to the school.
Right.
There's a break right up there, right there. So that's where the kids actually enter. They don't enter down in that area. There is no crossing. When I was out there, there was a crossing just south of the second parking lot right there. There is a crossing over the stub drain. It looks like there's a pipe there. It's been covered, but there's a chain over it. So kids use it, I think, but it's not a legitimate. And I think that's what Garrett is saying, that Kim would like to look at to see if we couldn't do something, or if the city couldn't do something to make sure that is a good access as well. And then I believe that pathway does go all the way over to the other crossing that's a little further to the west. And I am agreeing that's a long way to tell a young
far.
kid to walk that far just to double back through the park. They may never make it to school because there's so much to do in the park. But I
Jane?
think that certainly we want to work. I'm hoping that Kim has more pull with Nampa Meridian Irrigation District than I do.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Kavner.
Jane, is that fence that you talk about, is that the school district's fence or the irrigation district's fence?
I do not know whose fence it is. It typically would not be the irrigation district because they would probably not want a fence in their irrigation, in their ditch.
It's the school district.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
But
Councilman Hoagland.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if the police department, I think the security issues come into play here. So about school properties and access points. So could you enlighten us a little further about controlling access points and whatnot?
That's actually one that I'd probably have to defer to somebody else in reference to what the security procedures would be for that. Lieutenant Harper's probably the best guy with that information, but I could gather that information and bring that back.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Joe.
Lieutenant Harper is the one who told me in our project review meeting that he would want to minimize the access points to the school and would prefer to maintain what is already there.
And at least my experience of, again, local schools, everything's different, but you know, residential neighborhoods right adjacent to Sienna, they have gates that go one way. You know, they do allow, so open pathway access is not the preferred direction for the school district.
Mr. Mayor.
Elementary. Councilwoman Perot.
So just for clarification, if there is going to be a connection to the pathway that heads north through Fuller Park there on the east side of the park and goes up to, there's a fence that goes along that's on the school right there. Yep, keep going up. So there is a little tiny entrance right there, and literally the gate is like 3 feet wide. You can barely even get through it. And then the kids park all their bikes right in that area. That's like the place for all the bikes to go. So now if you've got children from 5 or 6 neighborhoods coming in and this tiny little entrance and bikes everywhere, I mean, I just think that like, those are the kind of things that it's not the applicant's responsibility to solve. But if that's going to be a main proposal, that this be a pedestrian access to the school, then those are the kind of things that, you know, should be discovered, I guess.
I agree.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Joe.
In fairness to the applicant, as well as, I guess, my own analysis, there's not an expectation, at least from staff's perspective, to have a direct access right to the school's front door. But the fact that it does abut property lines to it is a great benefit. I just don't want it to get lost that was an expectation from staff, that they would just have a clear access. I mean, this is obviously closer than you're going to get anywhere else around the area. So it's going to be a benefit and a lot less trips, hopefully less vehicle trips than what would have been if you're half a mile away or a quarter mile away on the south side of the railroad tracks even.
Joe, and I don't recall the school district talk about, because really they would say this is perfectly adequate connection to the school from a walking standpoint for elementary. It would be under their distance guidelines, no matter how you had them walk, and on sidewalks or on pathways.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Burnt.
I agree with what's been said. I think it's just really important that Kim Warren communicate with Nampa Meridian to see if we can make that little walk a little bit shorter. I agree with Ms. Perot.
Council, any further questions or comments? Councilman Burnt.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I don't like being bearer of bad news. I like this project. This project is great. Literally have no issues. The only concern that I have is the current state of our elected officials, and at the state level. And I know that this is not a surprise to you. We've been very consistent with it for the past month, and it's unfortunate that they weren't able to get their business done. I get why. COVID's important, and it's important to deal with COVID in the way that they dealt with this. So I get why that they took a little recess. But they're to be. I sat down with the speaker last week, and he was a gentleman about what the process is and what they're looking at, what their projection time is. They're hoping to be out of session at the end of the month. At the end of this month. And so, but he also said that when I grilled him on this, because I knew that we have projects that are coming up, and I wanted an exact time of when they were going to. And his response to me was, "We're done when we get our business done." And I just don't know what that is. And so hopefully it's at the end of the month. But until then, the most prudent thing that we should do in the city of Meridian is to continue these projects until we have clear understanding of what that direction is. So I'm one of 6. We've been pretty consistent with it, but it would be my recommendation to continue this project until at least the middle of next month.
Tonight, you're one of 5.
I'm one of 5, or excuse me. Yes, I am one of 5. That's true.
Can I respond a little bit to that?
Sure.
Yeah. That conversation that's being had at the legislature, it's going to go on, and it might not get resolved now, but it'll come up again. And I would just hate to see this, lose this opportunity to get this done now. We think that this particular project, the location surrounded by the infrastructure that the developer is trying to get done in a very timely manner, so he's not delayed, just really sets this particular project apart. And I do understand there are others that you have had to defer as well or continue as well. I would just hope that you might look at this one as being a little different, because we are trying so hard to do a really great infrastructure package for the city. And we know that that conversation, if it just keep happening. So I'm just hoping that we might make that move again. Just great opportunity with great land uses here, and the services are all here. I mean, we're not doing a stretch, with annexing property someplace out beyond. We are actually doing it almost right in your backyard. Well, it is your yard. So I'm just appealing to you to see if they might find another way. I do understand that has been your process, but I'm just hoping you might find just another little bit that might allow you to approve this one tonight. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Hoagland.
Councilman Borton said something asked a question early on in the process I found interesting. And that had to do with phase 1 and the conditional use permit parcel, which is the 12.74 acres that are already zoned R15. They've been zoned since 05, I believe, if I heard correctly. We have been dealing with annexations, not bringing in new property. And Jane, I agree, this is probably more of an infill project than it is out on the outskirts, but there is an impact that we are concerned about for purposes of providing services. But I'd like to explore a way, Mr. Neri, with a CUP where it's already zoned, and for discussion with council members, I believe we could we do an approval that is split with this sort of project? I don't know how to go about it, if you can, but I think it'd be worth exploring if council members want to look at that.
So, Mr. Mayor, members of council, Councilmember Hoagland, I mean, I don't know if that helps the applicant greatly, because yes, you can approve the conditional use permit. I don't see an issue with that. It's already zoned for that. It's annexed. I remember this apartment project that was supposed to be there originally. So that's not a problem. I don't know if that helps to move the process along faster. I mean, if it can, if it'd be beneficial, then it's certainly an option the council could consider, because again, if you had just that piece alone in front of you, there would be nothing really to deny. They're asking, other than the CUP is obviously a conditional use, but they're building what is proposed to be built there, and it's already zoned, and it's already annexed. So certainly if that could help at least continue the process moving forward, if the applicant's agreeable to that, I don't see any reason to, you couldn't do that if you want to.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Hoagland, do you have any?
Yeah, just to follow up, because Jane, I want to ask you the question, when I heard your presentation, the bridge and work on the road was going to be part of phase one. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, sir, that was right. However, I will go ahead and say, if you approve the CUP, we will respectfully request a change to our phasing so that we will start with the CUP property and still build the bridge. So anything we can do to move the project along. And again, with the idea that maybe by sometime next year, we're starting to do apartments and we have a bridge, which is a good thing. So I'll take it.
So there's no concern about the bridge not being part of the, because it appears to me to be in the annexation portion of the project. Does that not need to annex to do the road improvements?
Oh, yeah, okay. That would be the problem, I guess. I didn't think about the fact that there's really not a road there. Unlike most roads where you're building collectors, there's 50 feet of right of way, but there's nothing. There's a driveway there.
Well, Mr. Members of the council, I guess, and Ms. Nelson can correct me if I'm wrong, if they're agreeable to doing an offsite improvement of building the roadway and building the bridge, the risk potentially is the council does not approve the annexation. Now, again, I can't see the future very well, but you can certainly agree to do it.
Okay.
Whether we annex those pieces or not, you can agree to build something offsite.
I would get 216 apartments versus 75 single-family homes. There would be some issues with access to the existing property owners if we didn't proceed with getting their access to them. We do have an agreement with the Barron developer of Mile High Pines. So, part of this all hinges on us both moving forward with the improvements to Pine Avenue. You can see how complicated this is. Annexation of enough land for 75 single-family homes, and you're right, a CUP for 216 apartments. So, yeah, we'd love to take it. I think we would, but we would also want to make sure that we can make that happen, the offsite improvements, and make sure everybody's whole, because I don't want to do anything that would impact the Johnson family or the Swigert family who own the larger lots on the south side that are staying there. So we would have to take their land. To do the offsite improvements, we'd have to dedicate that land without any guarantee there would be anything adjacent to it, as you said. Oh, here we go. Help me out here. Thank you.
Mayor, members of the council, if I might jump in too, Deborah Nelson, 601 West Bannock. There's a lot of complications, as your attorney noted, with agreeing to that condition. I guess what I'd ask as we're trying to wrestle through that, you can see you've got a very cooperative applicant. They're trying to figure out how to accommodate your timing. And, one thing to consider, I'd ask the council to consider as you're discussing this is, I feel like that R15 zoning, the existing zoning is a huge distinguishing factor too for you to consider as you're thinking about, well, what's different about this project than others that you've had to defer. This one is integrated both in phasing and improvements and infrastructure, the Pine Street improvements that front it, every single thing is so integrated. That very complication that I think we're struggling with to piece apart from the different projects is also what limits your exposure from legislative actions related to property tax. That not only is it an infill location that's only a mile from your existing fire station that is fully staffed and at 85% reliability, but it's largely already annexed and served. So I guess I just asked that because I think it is difficult to, for the applicant to commit to building the bridge and the road improvements without secure annexation rights.
Right.
Even though they're trying, they're agreeable. And so that's what I would ask is you're considering this, is if that gives you another basis for saying this project is a little different from infill and location of services and the annexed piece. And then I'd be happy to help wrestle through any further.
Sure.
Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Borton.
I beat you to it. So here's my thought. I think it's one project. I think it's all to be reviewed and approved as one. And Jane, hats off to you to try and see if there's a way to make it work. That's just the way you do what you do, which is fantastic. But I still have the same reservations, and the reason that Councilman Burt brings it up. There's 5 of us here, but what the legislature is doing this session impacts the next 30 council members. We've been consistent.
Have you turned the video or the audio off of the screen and only using the mic?
How about now? How about now?
Yeah.
Did I touch something? Okay. Well, I think you got to continue it to May, just to be blunt. Every project we could try and parse out and create some specific parameters which warrant it going forward. And the very reason that we not entertained that, with, some limited exception of a little, a 1 acre infill here or there, is the magnitude of what is at risk is, tens of millions of dollars. So, and even though the R15 is annexed, there's nothing on it. So we don't have 400 people there that our fire department's going to. They're not using our parks. They're not using our water, wastewater. All of the services that we'll be unable to provide at the same service level if the legislature does what they've been trying to do, we can't service them in the same way. So those same concerns arise, and each individual application, we can argue that this is a little different and it's less of an impact perhaps than other types of applications, and we could split hairs with every one. So it's not and it's not easy to do. None of these have been easy to do, and it's not easy for any applicant who's stuck with this. But I think that's the perspective where we need to be unified in our expression to the legislature that it is a catastrophic failure to all municipal government if what they've tried to do to our finances were to happen. It drastically alters for generations what happens for cities. So we are painfully cautious because we don't want your residents to get a little less police service, not quite as nice a parks, a little less fire service, and that's not what you want either. So the lesser of two evils, I think, still has to be to continue it. I think approving even the CUP by itself brings on hundreds of people and a great demand to service when we don't know if we've got the revenue source to serve them in the same way. So it's the same argument and justification for the difficult decisions weeks ago, I think still stands here. And it stinks. It's terrible. But I don't think we can nor should we split hairs and try and carve out exceptions, because we could try and do that on everyone, unfortunately.
Mr. Mayor, before Jessica speaks, I don't mean to cut Jessica off, so guaranteed Jessica talks next, if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor. But
Councilman Burnt.
unfortunately, the way this legislation is being proposed, it doesn't matter where the new construction comes from, whether it comes from the periphery of our city, if it comes with an infill. New construction is new construction, and it's unfortunate. And so it had nothing to do with you. It has nothing to do with your project. You guys' presentation was money. It was great. The project is wonderful, with the exception of one thing. We just need to look into we just need more clarity in regard to what our state legislators are talking about, and it's that simple. So.
Councilman Pearl.
Thank you. I have a question about one or two subjects ago, back to the CUP. The CUP being potentially approved, with separately from the rest of the project. How does that work? Maybe this is a question for Bill. How does that work with the DA? Is it just becomes something where how is that written up then? Is there just, can you help me understand how that would work?
Well, I guess, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, Councilmember Ferraro, what I would suggest is if the council's desire is to consider that option of splitting this, and certainly Councilor Wharton made a pretty good case for not doing that, I would suggest you continue it for 2 weeks to see if we can even work this out. Again, I think it's pretty complicated. Again, I'm sure there's an existing DA on that property, but we didn't do a modification of it. There isn't? Okay. So we couldn't modify an existing DA. So again, I'm not sure totally how we would require the offsite improvements. I mean, they'd have to essentially promise to build it. So I would suggest if that's something the council wants to consider a potential resolution here, that we delay this for at least 2 weeks for Ms. Elson and I to have that conversation, see if it's even possible to do it. If it's not a consideration, then I wouldn't worry about it.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Joe.
clearly I'm not on the level of the attorneys in the room here, but the direction I'm getting from the other bill, Supervisor Bill, is that we pull the DA, or actually pull the CUP from the DA, and any offsite improvements would be conditions of approval, if that's the route that council took. Because it is already zoned, but that clearly for staff, that complicates things in the long term and how we go about this in the future, but that is a possible outcome.
Again, I think Ms. Nelson and I would probably have to have that discussion, and she's probably gonna have to verify with her clients to be willing to do that, because again, it is a gamble. And again, like I said, Councilor Wharton made a good case as to why maybe that isn't something the council wants to do. So I think you can, if you wish. I would suggest a little delay, a very short delay to do that. If you don't wish to do that, that's certainly understandable too.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilman Barrett.
At the end of the day, I just don't want to waste people's time. You know, Miss Nelson isn't for free, and neither are you, Jane. And so I'm just saying, I just don't want to waste your time. I guess I'm trying to be as frank and as direct as I possibly can. And I understand where Mr. Neri's coming from and where others might be coming from, trying to help you out and we're trying to be, I totally understand where you're coming from right now and the position that you're in. So I hope that you can feel that compassion coming from this council and from this dais. So, I mean, if it were me, I'd wait. But if you guys want to see what it looks like in 2 weeks, I mean, I guess that's totally up to you, and if that's your request for us.
Question to the council mayor.
Yes, Jane.
You mentioned May because that's the safe date to see what legislature does. Is that what you understand? We are in April, and we're talking maybe 2 weeks to figure out how we split the project up. Sounds like, I'm hoping it sounds like that we are on the road to an approved project. I'm hoping. I'd hate to have to start all over in 2 weeks with this presentation and about time, but I think it's a big risk, I think, for my client to say, I'm going to build some apartments and build a road and all of those things and put conduit under it and build a bridge and get started. I just would hope if we do agree that we delay till May, that we can hopefully do that sooner in May than later, if at all possible. We'll have some direction from the legislature. And that we move forward. I am just really talked to my client and the construction manager, and he just says, we're just running out of time to try to get this built, and we really want to get that built. So I'm just, you know, as much as I want to take a CUP, and then I realize all the complications and the impact on our neighbors, because they are also wanting to see how this all works out, because we have agreements on Pine. They've already been contacting us. They have a time schedule they're working on as well. So what, do we have a date in May, and do we have will we start all over with our presentation? And fill me in a little bit about what you expect.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burton.
as far as your presentation is concerned, that's totally up to you. Thankfully, these meetings are recorded, so Councilwoman Schrader probably most likely will be watching this recording and will be up to speed by the time we reevaluate in May. So I don't think that's an issue. Happens all the time with all of us. So as far as the presentation is concerned, I'll leave that up to you. That's totally up to your discretion. As far as dates are concerned, the first available date would be May 11th. That's cutting it pretty close. When I first looked at this calendar weeks ago, when we were evaluating potential issues and continuations, I was thinking more on the lines of the 18th. But I understand. I believe me, I get it. I totally understand where you're coming from, but those are the two dates. I'll leave that up to you.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Cavanagh.
a question for Mr. Neri. Mr. Neri, could we continue if the council wanted to continue it to, I think Council President Burnt said the 11th, and the legislature still hasn't signed EDI, there would nothing that would prevent us from continuing it yet an additional week at that point, correct?
Mr. Members of Council, Councilmember Cavanagh, nothing would prevent you from continuing it again.
Okay.
Is that a continuation for 2 weeks? 2 weeks out? Is that what Mr. Kavanagh was asking about?
No.
Mr. Cavanagh asked if somehow the 11th, we still didn't have an answer from the state, could the council continue it?
When your next council meeting is 2 weeks from tonight. Every Tuesday, 1 week from tonight. So 2 weeks from tonight, is there a possibility that I could go back and talk to my client and see if we couldn't talk a little bit about that? I mean, I'm saying both things. I'm saying, yeah, let's go to the 11th, and now we're talking about maybe it might be later. But my issue is getting my plans and some sort of approval over to my engineer so he can start working, and he will not start working until we have some sort of approval. So maybe, do we really think the legislature is not going to figure this out in 2 weeks at their deadline?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burton.
highly doubt it.
Well, yeah, as I said, I think it might go on for years.
No,
This decision.
they'll make a decision this session for sure.
And what I'm actually more concerned about is what decision they make, and then what this council will do with that information. 2 weeks may not give them time to contemplate what this means for future development in our community. So, you know, there are multiple layers to this conversation potentially.
Mr. Mayor, that's a good point. And I think that's part of our concern with the timing. Could we ask, and obviously this is your decision, but as we're considering timing, if we can come back in 2 weeks with the opportunity to discuss the CUP, understanding that not everybody may support that breakout, but if we have an opportunity to come back in 2 weeks to discuss that option, we'd sure like that opportunity, then can visit with the others involved in the development, think through the logistics, visit with Mr. Neri. And if that doesn't work either on our end or your end because you don't approve that, then we would get continued again. And hopefully we'll have a better idea if May 11th might work. We sure hope for the earlier date. And understand we're at, you know, we're really, all we can do is ask for your consideration in that. So
Well, let me at least
Mr.
poll
Mayor.
the council. I've heard from two that are more in favor of treating this as one project and not. If the three
Mr.
others
Mayor?
could wait, Councilman Cavanagh.
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Mr. Mayor, and I tend to agree with my colleagues. I look at this as one project. And while I'm certainly supportive if you all want to come back in 2 weeks and that's the direction the council wants to go, I won't oppose that. What I worry about, Jane and Deb, is we're continuing to still have city council meetings where the council is faced with this same challenge week in and week out, which we're then delaying and continuing out later in May. And so, for instance, you could come back 2 weeks from now and we could have already continued other stuff. So now the council's looking at middle to end of May. So I don't want to at least demonstrate some type of a commitment that if you come back and see us in 2 weeks, that we're going to be able to fit you on an agenda on May 11th. It may be the case, but I don't want to create a false hope that that is the reality.
Councilman Hoagland, your thoughts on one project versus separating them out?
Well, Mr. Mayor, when Councilman Borton started to speak, and I became very disheartened because I knew down deep he's correct. In terms of the fact that what we're doing and what the impact could be to our community with the legislative action that's being proposed is severe, and it impacts everything. Now, conversely, when we come, if the worst case scenario were to happen and we have all these that we've continued, and you look at all the projects on our outskirts of town, near our boundaries, versus projects like this that are next to schools, pathways, fire stations, the whole bit, your odds are good. But having said that, I think going to May 11th is the best option. I just do not see the legislature getting done in 2 weeks. It's just not, I've worked in that system before. I know how that train rolls, and it is not going to happen. So hopefully we have answers, and May 11th we can deal with it and move forward from there. So that's kind of my take on it.
Let's see if we can't schedule ourselves for May 11th to come back and talk about and hopefully have some direction a month from now. And in the meantime, I request Councilmember Burnt meet with the speaker again and get some direction. I'm just sorry, I couldn't help it. Because boy, don't we want to know?
I think you meeting with the speaker would be much better than us meeting with the speaker.
Whoa.
Mhm.
We got along. You and me, Dave. We'll do it. Okay.
Thank you very much. If there's some more questions, I'd be happy to ask them, but we'll move forward and see if we can't continue to May 11th. We'll not presenting again unless there's some questions that might have arisen.
Councilman Cavanagh, looks like you're ready.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just Jane, maybe I think using this as a good opportunity to collaborate with our park staff to address the pathway and the connectivity concerns. You guys are making a remarkable investment in connectivity, but I have to agree with Councilmember Perot. We've got to find the most efficient way to move these kids from your development to the school and secondarily to the park. We know they will find their own pathways if we don't provide them for them. And so let's use some subject matter expertise and see if we can find a better solution. Recognizing that the school's got their concerns about access, but I think there are some much easier ways to get kids over to that part of Meridian than taking Pine to 10 Mile or by doubling back through a couple of neighborhoods.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilman Pro.
Thank you for that, Mr. Cavanagh. I know I am coming off assertively, and that's just because I'm very much in mama bear mode, because I had one of those kids that was almost ran over across Pine because he went to Chaparral. And so I have strong feelings about this. I know that's showing through. But I am also, as a member of this council, going to be objective about it. And I know my fellow council members can tell you that I strongly advocate for many of our neighborhoods, that if I see a concern for access or safety. So that being said, I wanted to answer the mayor's question. I do think that we need to keep these two tied together, the CUP with the annexation and the zoning as part of the same development agreement. I think that separating them, not only from a timing standpoint, but obviously as you had indicated, you would put quite a bit of financial investment in completing the road and the bridge and not having a guarantee of annexation. So I think it would be wiser all the way around to keep those projects together.
Thank you. And while we've sometimes asked whether or not we should leave it open or close the public hearing, it sounds like we should leave this one open for the conversation about if there's something else on that pathway connection between now and then. So with that, council, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burt.
I move that we continue this public hearing for Foxcroft subdivision H-2020-0113 to May 11th.
Mr. Mayor, second the motion.
I have a motion, a second. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the item is continued. Thank you. With that, we'll move on to our next action items under ordinance. The first item is ordinance number 21-1926. I'll ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance related to H 2020-0112 Teeth Row Crossing subdivision for annexation of a parcel of land located in the southwest one quarter of section 36, Township 4 North, Range 1 West, Boise Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, and being more particularly described in Attachment A and annexing certain lands and territories situated in Ada County, Idaho, and adjacent contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Meridian as requested by the city of Meridian, establishing and determining the land use zoning classification of 8.12 acres of land from RUT to R8 medium density residential zoning district in the Meridian City Code. Providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing for a summary of the ordinance and providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this item read by title. Would it be like it's read in its entirety, or anyone in the room? Hearing no one, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance H 2020-0112 Teeth Row Crossing subdivision with the suspension of rules.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to approve this item under suspension of the rules. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. Next item on the agenda is ordinance number 21-1927. Ask the clerk to read this ordinance by title.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's an ordinance related to H 2020-0105 Cache Creek subdivision for annexation of a parcel of land located in the southeast one quarter of section 19, Township 3 North, Range 1 East, Boise Meridian, Ada County, Idaho, and being and comprising a portion of Victory Road and Locust Grove Road and all of lots 1, 2, and 7, Block 1 of the Kachina Estates, particularly described in Attachment A, and annexing certain lands and territories situated in Ada County, Idaho, and adjacent contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Meridian as requested by the city of Meridian, establishing and determining the land use zoning classification of 15.18 acres of land from RUT to R4 medium low density residential zoning district in the Meridian City Code. Providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing for a summary of the ordinance and providing for a waiver of the reading rules and providing an effective date.
Thank you. Council, you've heard this item read by title. Is there anybody that'd like it read in its entirety? Seeing nothing, do I have a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Pro.
I move that we approve ordinance number 21-1927 H 2020-0105 Cache Creek subdivision with the suspension of the rules.
I have a motion and a second to approve this item under suspension of the rules. Is there a discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it, and the item is agreed to. Council, any future meeting topics? Or do I have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Mayor,
Councilman Burke.
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
I got the motion.
Motion second, adjourn the meeting. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The ayes have it. We are adjourned.